My name is Jeremy Cole, and for about 5 years, I worked as an accounting manager for one of the largest business firms in the country. My life for those 5 years was seemingly perfect. But little did I know that what would come after in the next few years would be far from that. In the year 2018, the firm I worked for decided to let employees go in an attempt to cut costs on salaries. Sadly, I was one of the employees let go. My life only went downhill from that point. Attempts at getting a new job seemed pointless at the time, but the pandemic that came in 2020 made an idea of getting a new job impossible. And in just 3 years, my wife had divorced me and taken the kids, leaving me with regular child support payments while unemployed. And suddenly, by 2021, I found myself in nearly crippling debt. I owed banks and family members huge sums of money, while at the same time being behind on almost all my bills. It was this situation that led me to make one single life-changing decision. A decision that could have gone horribly wrong. The date was November 13th, 2021, and as I said earlier, I was behind on a lot of payments, and so I decided I needed to find another way to make money and fast. I looked on the web for fast ways to earn large sums of money and was bombarded immediately with numerous sites advertising freelance jobs and how much I could earn from them. I ignored these sites as I had previously attempted freelancing during the quarantine. Now, looking for something a lot more serious and promising. After scrolling for some time, I eventually found a site that wasn't necessarily what I was looking for, but intrigued me as it gave detailed examples and instructions on ancient rituals used to make money and fast. Now, at the time, I wasn't the type to believe in rituals, spirits, or religion. But as the saying goes, desperate times call for desperate measures. So I looked through the site till I found one relatively easy that seemed to be the answer to my problems. It was called The Man in the Fields. I began to read what the site had to say on the game. It is advised not to play this game, but to those who seek wealth and protection, engage at your own risk. If you indeed win this game, you will be granted financial and physical protection for an entire year. But if you lose, the consequences could be dire. To begin this game, you must summon the Man in the Fields. To do this, you will need to go into your backyard with a lantern and ask 7 times, but who will scare the crows away? If you hear nothing after the 7th time, then the summoning failed and the game is over. But if you hear a voice say, "That's not your biggest problem," then the game has now begun. At this point, the first thing you'll need to do is to go into your home and find a room with only one door. Put a crucifix in it and close everything in it that can be closed. This will be your safe haven. Once you leave this room, you will find that everything in your home that can be open will be open, and your job is to close all these items before the clock strikes 12. Throughout the ritual, as you close each item that is opened, you will see an eerie man dressed in farmer's overalls with a deathly complexion on his face. Ignore him, as he is not the man, but the herald, and not what you should fear. At no point should you look into your yard. If you do, you will see the elongated man in the fields, and he will see you. However, if this should happen, you will need to return to your safe haven immediately and remain there as the man in the fields will rush his way into your home in search of you. Close your eyes till the sun comes up, and this will end the game. Otherwise, you will be caught by the man in the fields, and pagan deities are unforgiving. But if you complete the task at hand without looking at the man, return to your room, and once the sun comes up, the man in the fields will reward you. I spent the next few days thinking over whether or not the game was a good idea. Despite my lack of belief in the supernatural, I wasn't too eager to summon a pagan deity after being warned not to. But then, one afternoon, I received a call from my ex-wife. "Hello?" I knew I hadn't paid child support for the past 2 months, but was surprised as she usually wasn't the one who called. "Jeremy, I'm just calling you to give you a heads up. My lawyers and I filed a complaint against you, and we have a court date in January. You're going to receive the papers soon, but I simply felt I should be the one to tell you myself. Goodbye." She hung up immediately after that, and I slowly felt myself being filled with confusion and disappointment. Soon enough, I felt nothing but anger, and without any further hesitation, I knew what to do. I decided to play the game at my parents' house, as they barely stayed there on weekends and were the only people I knew personally who had a backyard. It started getting dark around 6 p.m., and I began looking for the room I would use as my safe haven. My childhood bedroom turned out to be the best option, as it was basically empty and barely had anything in it that would need to be closed. So I took my mom's crucifix and placed it in the center of the room before heading out to start the game. The time was 11 p.m., and it was now completely dark out. The thought of what I was about to do made the yard look scarier than it ever had, and despite having made up my mind on what I had to do, I could feel a lump form in my throat as I lit the candle and stepped into the yard. With every step I took deeper into the yard, I said the words, "But who will scare the crows away?" After the 6th time, I stood with my hands shaking slightly as I wondered if I should stop and walk back in. But I simply took a deep breath and said for the 7th time, "But who will scare the crows away?" The silence in the yard was almost deafening. I could feel my heart beating, and after a while, not hearing anything, I blew the candle out and began walking towards the house, partly relieved. It was only then that I heard a voice that sent shivers down my spine say, "That's not your biggest problem." My instinctive reaction was to turn and see who spoke, but luckily, I quickly remembered the rules of the game and kept walking to the house. It was impossible to not notice what had obviously changed about the house. All doors, drawers, shelves, and cans were open, and I immediately began to close them. With every door I closed, I made sure to not even mistakenly look outside. The kitchen took the longest, as numerous cans, bottles, and pots were opened, but I carefully closed them all, one after the other. It was only as I closed the kettle I noticed the reflection of a man with a hat standing behind me. I began to shake as I put the lid back on the kettle, unsure of whether to turn to look at him. I decided to simply glance as I left the kitchen. The figure stood in the kitchen, was dressed in farmer's clothes, and every part of him was gray and stained with what I assumed was dirt. He had no footsteps as he followed me slowly around the house while I continued the task. I remembered the site said to ignore the being, but that wasn't easy in the slightest, as I was completely scared and couldn't tell where the figure was most of the time. But eventually, I was done. I shut the last door and expected the figure following me to disappear, but it didn't. And soon enough, I began panicking as I wondered if I had carried out the wrong task. The being stood still, and I decided to go rouse the house once more to ensure I had closed everything. But something was different this time, as the being was no longer just silently following me and seemed closer every time I looked. My heart began pounding, and I couldn't stop shaking. Suddenly, I noticed an empty open can in the kitchen sitting beside the sink, and I hoped closing it would send the being away. I walked towards the sink, but as I picked up the can, it slipped and fell right out of my hands. At this point, I could feel the figure standing directly behind me, looking over my shoulder. I was fully focused on the being now, so I slowly picked up the can, but as I got back up, I was met by the window that sat over the sink and a clear view of the backyard. My heart stopped, and the figure disappeared as I stared at what I could only describe as a bunch of bones and sticks put together to look like a scarecrow. The scarecrow was about 8 feet tall, with arms reaching the ground, and in place of its usual pumpkin head was an inhuman skull. I stood frozen as I stared out the window. The man in the fields began to slowly come closer, and before I knew, he was running towards the house. I immediately dropped the can and began racing to my room upstairs. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, but continued running, and right before closing the door, I got a good look at the creature I had summoned. I shut the door, and the house was filled with a piercing screech, followed by claw sounds and bangs on the door. The clawing and screeching continued, and I simply cried, gripping the crucifix and praying for the sun to come up. This went on for hours, but eventually, all I heard was silence. I stayed in my childhood bedroom till 3 p.m. that day. The sun had been up for a while, but my fear didn't let me leave as the image of the man in the fields played over in my memory. In the month that followed, I had my parents admit me into a mental clinic as I kept seeing shadowy figures everywhere and was constantly waking up from nightmares. My court date came and passed, and my absence resulted in my wife claiming the apartment I was living in and most of what little I had left, but I didn't care much. It's been 2 years now, and no amount of time has been able to help me forget that night. I never see my family anymore, and I barely get by with the job I have as a janitor. Things seem to be getting worse, but no matter how bad they get, I would warn everyone, never to summon a man in the fields. When I was a teenager, I had a friend who lived near the forest. Our small town in Colorado had a mountain on one side and a thick forest on the other. Henry and I grew up together. His house was big and built sometime during the 1800s. A full wooden house with a wine cellar and a basement. Once, while playing in his backyard, he stumbled over something and fell. It wasn't a rock, because we always made sure that there were no rocks in the backyard while we played.
Cole, see? It looks like a metal box.
There in the middle of the backyard was a corner of a metal box peeking from the ground.
Yeah, let's dig it and see if we find some treasure.
We both were very excited to find something as we knew that Henry's house had a history even before his family bought it. We sat on the ground and started digging with our hands, getting the dirt between our nails and on our clothes. We did not care. All we wanted was to find what was inside the box. Finally, after a few hours of digging and completely getting ourselves dirty, we removed the box from the ground. It was an old tin case. Henry, being the more curious of us, shook the box violently against his ear. We could hear something in the box like a piece of glass or something. Unfortunately, we couldn't open the box as it had an old rustic-looking lock on it.
We should ask your dad to break the lock for us so we can find what's in there,
I suggested, and we both ran inside with the box in hand. We found Henry's dad sitting in the drawing room watching TV. Why are you boys so dirty? And what is that?
We found this box in the backyard while playing, and we want you to break the lock so we can see if there's treasure inside,
Henry told his father. His dad laughed and took the box from us. He grabbed a small screwdriver and a hammer and broke the lock, and then handed us the box. We went to the backyard and opened the box. But before we could take a look at what was inside, Henry said,
"Whatever we find, we split it 50-50. Agreed?"
"Absolutely." I complied eagerly. Then we opened the box. We were hoping to find a treasure or at least some money or something extremely valuable. But instead, there was a thick piece of paper folded in half and a tear-shaped piece of glass.
"Looks like it's a map to a hidden treasure,"
Henry said, too eager to find some long-lost treasure.
"Let's open it and see what it is,"
I said. We opened the folded paper, and to our surprise, it was a very old-looking Ouija board.
Wow, a Ouija board. What the hell? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, not what you expected, but amazing nevertheless.
Hey, it's pretty late today, but why don't we play with it tomorrow?
Sure, I'll be here in the morning and then we can play with it. With that, I went home. The next day I was there before lunch and we went into the basement and laid out the board. Henry's basement was like a storeroom, but a bit cleaner. We often played there when it was raining or snowing outside. There was some furniture there, an old couch, a wooden cupboard that probably belonged to the previous owner, some more miscellaneous furniture, and a full-length mirror. We sat in the basement in front of the mirror and started playing. Before that day, we had never seen a real Ouija board, let alone played with one. All we knew was you are supposed to put your finger on the glass piece and ask questions. So we began. "Is there a spirit here with us?" I asked. And there was no reply. The glass piece did not move. "We would like to connect with any spirit lingering in this house." I tried again. But again, there was no reply. Then we tried asking some more questions along the line, but still, no response.
"I don't think there are any spirits here,"
Henry said, finally frustrated. "I think Ouija boards are fake. We both laughed after that.
Should we go upstairs for lunch? Nah, let's give it a last try, and if this time nothing happened, we will go up.
Henry said. Okay, if you say so. Is there any spirit or ghost who would like to talk to us? I said in a bored voice. I knew for sure there would be no reply. But suddenly, the glass piece moved and stopped at the word, yes.
Did you move it? No, I swear I did not.
When we both realized that the glass piece had moved on its own, we exchanged a scared but excited look.
Who are you?
Henry asked. The glass piece moved around some more and stopped on random letters. When we spelled them out, it gave us a name. Ivan Volkov.
It seems like a foreign name, maybe Russian,
I said.
Are you Russian?
Henry asked. The piece again stopped on yes.
Are you trapped here?
Again, a yes.
Why are you trapped here?
This time, the piece moved for a long time. I died here, so I'm stuck here. After every reply we got, we became more and more curious and carefree. The spirit Ivan, whom we had found to be a Russian soldier who had died here, seemed not so harmful. We gathered from our chat that he died in the late 1800s and was buried somewhere in an unmarked grave on Henry's property. He had been here ever since then. Suddenly, Henry's mom called us from upstairs for lunch. We got up and left just like that, too eager to have lunch as we were pretty hungry. We ate our lunch while watching cartoons and then returned to the basement. However, when we got down there, nothing was how we had left it except the Ouija board. Everything was falling, and some of the old glass pieces were shattered on the floor. I and Henry were confused. The board and the glass piece were completely still untouched. However, when we looked into the mirror, we saw the reflection of the glass piece move, and a dead soldier was standing right behind us. We both screamed and ran upstairs. Henry's parents were confused at first, but when we told them what had happened, his dad went downstairs and grabbed the godforsaken game. He put it into the tin box we had found it in, locked it, and the next day buried it somewhere deep into the forest. He believed that the Ouija board was cursed. That's why it was locked and buried in the first place. Also, upon doing some research, we realized that I and Henry just left the game for lunch without saying goodbye or ending our connection with the spirit. After that day, I never played with a Ouija board in my life and steered clear of any such cursed games. Urban legends and myths have always been something my friends and I used to have a lot of fun with while growing up. We would occasionally scare or prank each other, but apart from this childish interest, we never really took any steps to find out if these myths were real or not. That was until our last week in high school when we decided it was time to take the next step. My friend Jason and I had watched a couple of YouTube videos where people played games summoning myths and demons. From Charlie Charlie to Bloody Mary, the idea of encountering a supernatural being or spirit intrigued us and left us asking if these myths were truly myths or actual reality. A question that would eventually leave us all wishing we never asked. It was our last week of high school, and while most people our age were out partying and planning, I decided what my friends and I needed to do together before leaving for college was something we'd always wanted to do. My parents were out of town that week, so I figured there was no better time. I got on my computer and looked up some of the most popular urban myths to summon, but most instructions were either unclear or too complicated to carry out in my home. Eventually, I found a site that had listed numerous urban legends, stories, and instructions on how to summon, although warning against it. I spent a while on the site till I eventually found a game I had never heard of. One man hide and seek. The next day I told my friends about the plan. Sophie was skeptical at first, but Jason and I helped her relax, and I told them to come over later that day so I could explain the rules and what I would need from each of them. Okay guys, this is called One Man Hide and Seek, and the rules of the game are simple. I continued. First, we need a doll that doesn't look human but has limbs. So Sophie, I think one of your rag dolls as a kid should work. Next, we cut the doll open with a needle, removing its stuffing and filling it with rice. I was interrupted by Jason saying, "Sorry, did you say rice?" I replied, "Yes, the rice attracts the demon." Then we clip our nails and put them in with the rice. We aren't supposed to put the nails of other people or else they might get hurt. After that, we take a piece of red thread and sew the dowel back up without cutting off the extra length. Instead, we take the extra length and tie it around the dowel before tying the two ends together. The site said this represents the dowel's blood vessels and traps the spirit in the dowel. I was interrupted again by Sophie and Jason laughing, but I couldn't understand why they found it a bit funny, so I continued reading the instructions. We fill the bathtub with water and put the dowel in there to separate the spirit world from the real world. Then we find a room with a TV to hide in, so I was thinking the living room. We purify the room we're hiding in. Jason, your mom still has those incense candles she uses for yoga, right? Jason simply nodded and I continued. We'll place a cup of salt water and the needle in the room. Then we give the dowel a name. Not ours and not anyone we know. Jason raised his hand before saying, "Lucia." Sophie and I didn't seem to have any issues with the name, so I continued giving instructions. It was getting a bit late now, so I decided to hurry up. After that, we turn off all the lights and devices apart from the TV. Then we say to the dowel 3 times, "We are the first it." Then we run to the room, turn on the TV, and stay as quiet as possible. Sophie then said, "Hold on, why does the TV have to be on and what happens if we aren't quiet enough?" "Are you scared?" he said, laughing. I responded with, The room went silent for a while, but I continued. We close our eyes and count to 10. Once we're done, we get the needle, go back to the bathtub, and say to the dowel, "We have found you, Lucia." Then we cut the thread, binding the dowel, and say 3 times, "Lucia, you are the next it." Return the dowel to the tub and hide in the room. We remain as silent as possible, fill our mouths with salt water, and search for Lucia. Most times, it remains in the bathroom, so no need to worry. When we find the dowel, we spray the salt water from our mouths on its face and say, "We have found you." Then we burn the dowel and discard its remains. I looked up to see a worried look on Sophie's face, and she eventually said, "So what happens if it's not in the bathroom and we can't find it?" I didn't have an answer to that, so I responded with, "The site doesn't say anything about that, but that's why we have to keep the salt water on us as protection. That's it." The concern on their faces became more obvious, and a part of me began to think, maybe it wasn't such a good idea. But I brushed the feeling off, and they simply went home agreeing to be back at mine by midnight. Sophie returned around 11 p.m., as she said. She didn't want to be out on the streets by midnight, while Jason, on the other hand, didn't arrive until 1 in the morning. I wasn't sure we had enough time to set up, as the game had to be played at exactly 3 a.m. But immediately, Jason arrived, we had it all set up in around 30 minutes. The rag doll Sophie had gotten was green and was also missing one of its button eyes. But we didn't think that would be a problem, as the doll didn't look human at all, and that was all that mattered. Eventually, it was almost 3 a.m., and it seemed Jason had gotten over his paranoia, if he had any, as no one was more excited than him to play the game. At around 2:58 a.m., we turned the lights off, turned on the TV, and before we knew it, it was time. We all walked into the bathroom, and the sight of a floating rag doll in a bathtub filled with water wasn't as creepy as I thought it would be. Jason walked up to Lucia, picked her up, and said, "Jason, Sophie, and Mark are the first it. Jason, Sophie, and Mark are the first it. Jason, Sophie, and Mark are the first it." He returned the doll to the tub, and we all moved back to the living room. Nothing out of the ordinary was happening, so we closed our eyes and began counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Before I could say 10, I heard a thud, followed by a light scream, so I immediately opened my eyes to see Jason holding on to Sophie and laughing. We stayed laughing for a while before eventually deciding to finish the game. I returned to the bathroom to see the doll still floating in the tub. At this point, I was feeling more comfortable now, so I picked up the doll and cut the thread with the needle before saying, We have found you. You are the next it, Lucia." It was only as I said those words I realized something strange. Despite being submerged in water for a while now, the doll in my hand was nowhere near wet. In fact, it almost felt completely dry. I returned the doll to the tub, and we immediately went back to the living room and filled our mouths with salt water. After waiting for a while, once again, nothing strange happened, and I could see relief on Sophie's face. At this point, I decided it was time to finally end the game, but as we began walking towards the bathroom, Jason spat the water from his mouth and said, "This was fun, guys, but it was obviously all a load of crap." I opened the door once again, expecting to see the funny sight of a rag doll floating in my tub for the third time that night. But all I felt that instant were chills run down my spine. Literally. The bathroom was eerily cold, and I could almost hear my heartbeat as I was met by the sight of the bathtub filled with nothing but completely still water. "What the hell?" Jason said. But before he could say more, we heard a loud sound come from the living room. We slowly walked back into the living room to see the TV randomly changing channels from one to another before eventually losing audio and then switching off, plunging the room into darkness. I immediately rushed to turn on the lights. A look of fear was all over Sophie and Jason's face, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a terrible mistake making them play the game. "Guys, let's just calm down, find the doll, and spray the salt water on its face. As long as we stay together, we should be fine." Sophie responded with, "Why can't we just leave and go home?" I could tell she was completely bothered now, so I replied calmly, "The site warned us against leaving because our nails are in the doll. It won't just let us go on with our lives, so relax. Come on, let's just find the doll." We looked around the house for about an hour, all the while hearing loud thuds and sounds that didn't seem normal to anyone. The phones had lost all signal, and leaving the house wasn't an option. The longer we took, the more things we began to hear, and eventually, we could hear what seemed like laughter coming from all around the house. It was a deep laugh, and we couldn't tell exactly which direction it was coming from. That was until the voice finally spoke.
"Mark, Sophie, Jason, if what you seek is to return me to my realm, then come find me upstairs. But I warn you, I will not return alone. A soul must come back with me."
The voice was strangely deep, and the house felt extremely cold now. "What does that mean?" Sophie said. Jason responded with, "You know what it means." They looked at me as if asking what next to do, but I was completely scared now, and I could tell they were too. "Let's go find it. Here," I said, handing them the glass of salt water. "No matter what, don't let the salt water out of your mouths, and let's stay together." Immediately, we walked upstairs. We could feel the temperature drop, and more laughter filled the house. Only this time, it was obviously coming from my parents' room. Jason began walking towards the room while we followed behind, and as we arrived at the door, everything went completely silent. Jason slowly pushed the door open, but before we could walk in, he was pulled in, and the door slammed behind him. I immediately began banging on the door, but it was as if someone was holding it firmly in place. I kept kicking and kicking till eventually it broke, and I walked into the horrific sight of Lucia seated on Jason. His hands appeared to be pinned to the floor, and although Lucia's hands weren't even close to Jason, huge claw-like marks were all over his chest. I stood frozen, looking at the horrific scene of my best friend Jason being mutilated by a doll. The doll abruptly paused and looked at me for a second. I could almost see a smile on its face, but before I could react, it was immediately covered in salt water from Sophie's mouth. Later that night, I burnt the doll and discarded its remains. The phone started working not long after the doll was burnt, and Sophie quickly called an ambulance. Jason survived the encounter, and no matter how many times we tried to explain the situation, there was no way the police were going to be convinced what we were saying was actually the truth. The police tried for months to make sense of the case, as the marks on Jason didn't seem human at all, and his story correlated with ours, but eventually they closed the case, stating we had been under the influence and Jason was probably attacked by an animal that night. A conclusion I could only wish was true. After that night, our curiosity for urban myths and legends completely faded, and sadly, so did our friendship. I am a father now, and I still spend hours wondering why the demon left Jason alive. The sleepless nights are less now, but I'll never forgive myself for putting their lives in danger, all in the name of an urban myth. Despite my experience, I wouldn't tell you all urban myths have some truth behind them, but I know for a fact that you should never play the game one man, hide and seek. Hello, my name is Lindsay. You could say I'm one of those pioneers in urban explorations, although no one ever really gave me credit for that. My YouTube channel was always specialized in horror stuff, and at the time, I was pretty well known. But after what I experienced that night, I decided to delete my channel and be forgotten forever. My story began at the height of urban legends and creepypastas. At that time, all you could see of horror on YouTube were gameplays of popular content creators playing games like Amnesia or Slender Man. I was never good at games, but I loved horror, and I was ready to go further. I started doing urban exploration. I had already gone to some cemeteries with friends when I was younger, but I had never done anything like this for YouTube, although I didn't think it would be much different. There were already some other YouTubers. I can't say I was the first one to do it, but I realized that this was something new and that sooner or later I would explode and I would be one of the first. I started with some cemeteries and abandoned places. My audience, who were used to me uploading crime investigation videos, reacted very well and wanted more content. Soon after, I upped the ante and started looking for ghosts more aggressively, like playing Ouija or summoning the ghost of Bloody Mary, but none of that worked. Until I decided to film myself playing the elevator game. To play the elevator game, I had to follow a set of rules. But if part of the challenge I would do, I could only see the rules on the spot. To start the game, I went to a luxurious hotel with more than 10 elevators, as this was the condition to be able to play the game. I put a camera in my shirt pocket so I could capture whatever happened, even though I knew nothing would happen for sure. I started by taking the elevator to the second floor. Then I pushed the button for the fourth floor, and from there, I went back to the second floor. Following the rules, I went to the sixth floor, back to the second floor, and from there, I went to the 10th floor. From that floor, I went back to floor 5. I was about to see the rules again, but on that floor, something strange happened. A very strange-looking woman got on the elevator with me. The woman was very tall. Her face was elongated and deformed. Possibly, she had some kind of disease. Her clothes looked old-fashioned as if they were from several years ago. But what struck me the most about her were her eyes. They were red. Was she wearing contact lenses? Before I could see the rules again, the elevator started moving again, and she went up to the 10th floor. Even though I had filmed all this time, the game was ruined by the strange woman getting on the elevator, as I couldn't keep going from one floor to another with another person next to me. Besides, this woman was really very strange and gave me a bad feeling. With her on camera, I'm sure I'd have good content for YouTube by now. I was getting off the elevator, but to my surprise, the woman spoke to me. "Where are you going?" "What do you mean? My room is on this floor." As soon as I told that lie, something surprised me. The elevator doors closed by themselves with me inside. Without anyone touching it, the elevator started to go down to the second floor. The woman didn't answer me. She just stared at me in a terrifying and intimidating way. To avoid the awkward silence, I grabbed my cell phone and looked at the rules, just to make the time pass faster. When I saw the rules, I froze. The rules said that on the 5th floor, a woman I had to ignore would get on the elevator, and on the 10th floor, she would ask me where I was going. The rule said whatever it took, I had to ignore her. I swear, I can't tell you the horror I felt in my whole body. It was as if a current of fear and pain ran through me from head to toe. As I read the rules, I could feel this woman's gaze scanning me up and down. I could hear a giggling coming from behind me. We both knew we hadn't followed the rules. The laughter was getting louder and louder, but immediately I began to feel something very strange. The laughter wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was coming from my own head. The laughter sounded louder and louder and louder and louder from inside my head. The elevator reached the 1st floor, and when the doors opened, I escaped as fast as I could. The pain in my head was too strong, and the voice kept ringing and never seemed to stop. Dizzy and full of pain, I fell to the floor, and suddenly I felt something pull my leg with enormous violence. It was the woman from the elevator. When I could see her, something in her had changed. She no longer had eyes, nose, ears, or anything. She only had a huge mouth that covered her whole face. The woman dragged me back into the elevator with enormous violence, and when she had me there, she did nothing. The silence was absolute. It was as if she had left. Only she didn't, because I could hear her breathing behind me. That's not all. From her mouth, I could feel hot saliva dripping down the back of my neck. The woman was behind me, but she chose not to attack me. This was not a wild animal. This was a thinking being. Very sadistic thinking being. The elevator doors closed with me inside, and it began to rise. As it did, I could feel the woman's breath behind me, closer and closer to my neck. All I could do was tear up and hope that someone would find my camera. Hope that no one else would make this mistake that I made and not tempt unknown forces. When the woman was behind me, the elevator arrived at its destination. I listened as the woman opened her mouth. She was about to die. So I closed my eyes and cried harder than ever. "Are you all right, young lady?" When I opened my eyes, there was a man behind me. This was a normal man, and he was looking at me in a confused manner. I turned around, and the woman was gone. The man must have asked for the elevator and broken up the game. This man unknowingly saved my life. When I contacted the police, they looked at the tape of the hotel, but there was nothing. According to it, I was alone all this time, but there was one thing, that the face I could detect. In it, you can see somehow, someone invisible grabbed my feet, proving that something weird had really happened. Do you want to know another curious thing? Once I took the camera out of my shirt, I noticed that it was empty. I had never recorded anything, although I was sure I had initiated the recording. As much as I investigated, I discovered that this woman was surely from another dimension, and I had called her while playing the elevator game. Possibly, that was the reason no camera could detect her. A few days later, I deleted all my ideas from YouTube, and although they say that the files are always left on the internet, I must admit that this worked for me. Eventually, people stopped talking about me, and years later, everyone had already forgotten about me. It cost me a lot to do this, but if anyone had seen the leaked hotel videos or heard my story, they would have gone to try to do the same thing. If you are listening to this story, don't play the elevator game for nothing. The only reason I am telling you this is to let you know that what I experienced is real. And if you don't follow my warning, you may end up in another dimension, and to be honest, you won't be welcomed. Hey, my name is Helen, and I have a question for you. Do you believe in the paranormal? Do you believe that there are unexplained things? Things beyond our understanding? Or do you believe that, given enough time, you could understand the origin of anything? I used to be one of those people. Those people who don't believe in anything. But after that night in the elevator, that night when I received the strange call, I was forced to believe. It all started on a Saturday. That day, my grandmother had called me on the phone, but since I was taking a bath, I couldn't answer it. I received the missed call and immediately called her, but no one answered. I didn't really expect a call from her since we had a very bad relationship. I don't know why I would do it, but I always felt like she hated me. I never did anything but treat her well, but she seemed to have her disdain for me. She never looked at me and always avoided any contact with me. And when we were alone, she would hit me. Once I grew up, I stopped talking to her and cut off any kind of relationship with her. So you can imagine that receiving a call like that seemed very strange to me. Worried, I called my mom to let her know. She told me she had missed a call as well. My mom lived really far away, so I had no way to see my grandmother. So she told me to go check on her and make sure everything was okay. I really didn't like having to see my grandmother. Since I'm an adult, she treats me with a little more respect, but I still feel like she hates me, since she doesn't do much to hide it. Anyway, I knew I had to go. I was doing this for my mother, not for her. Unwillingly but willingly, I put on a jacket and went to take the elevator of the apartment where I lived. There were people taking it on another floor, so I took the stairs. I started to go down the stairs, but in the middle of my distraction, something happened. Suddenly, my cell phone rang, and to my surprise, I almost fell down the stairs. Angry, I got up and grabbed my cell phone from the floor. I hate the stairs. Next time, I'll take the elevator. When I picked up the phone, I breathed a sigh of relief. It was my grandmother. I answered it, thinking that with this call, I would see what she wanted, and I wouldn't have to go to her house. But when I picked it up, I was very worried. On the other end of the phone, no one was talking to me. All I heard was agitated, even violent breathing. It was as if the person on the other end was choking. I tried to call 911, but for some reason, the phone wouldn't hang up. I tried to turn it off, but I couldn't either. The call was still active, and on the other end, I heard a lady breathing. That was definitely my grandmother. I sent a message to my mom telling her to call the ambulance and ran to her house, hoping to save her if something was happening to her. Luckily, she lived a few blocks away, so the drive was quick. During the ride, I tried to call her several times, but nothing. I could only hear her breathing getting more and more intense. I couldn't hear anyone else with her. She must have had an accident. When I was about to enter her house, something stopped me. I started to feel a very strong pain all over my head. It was a familiar pain, but intense. I fell to the floor, kneeling in pain, not knowing what to do, but I couldn't stop. I stood up and went into her apartment with the spare keys I had at home. As I entered her apartment, I quickly asked for the elevator, which was luckily nearby. She lived on the 10th floor, so there was no way she could climb the stairs. Grasping my head in pain, I got on the elevator and pushed the button to go to the floor where my grandmother lived. But halfway up, the elevator stopped and the lights went out. After a few seconds, other lights came on again. They were red and somewhat broken emergency lights. I took up my cell phone to send a picture to my mother, telling her to let her know I was trapped. To make matters worse, my head hurt more than ever. When I activated the phone, I noticed that the call was still active, and my breathing was louder than ever. Activating the camera, I was about to take the picture, but something interrupted me. The camera was pointing to the floor, and I saw feet that were not mine. I ran the camera, and where those feet were, there was no one. As I put the camera back on, I felt the pain in my head get worse and worse. As a reflex action, I lifted the camera up, and there she was. It was my grandmother. My grandmother was pale, breathing violently as she squeezed my head violently. Now I remember that pain. That's the pain I felt when I was a child. My grandmother used to squeeze my head with her fingers when we were alone. Just like when I was a child, I couldn't free myself. The pain was too strong. I felt as helpless as when I was a child. As she hurt me, I could hear her dark breaths. It was exactly the same as the one I heard on the phone. At that moment, I realized that the noise on the phone was not coming from my grandmother's room. It was coming from next door to me. All this time, My grandmother's spirit was next to me, mistreating me. Was I going crazy? This couldn't be real. My grandmother squeezed harder and harder. I was losing consciousness, and I felt like I was going to break my skull. Amidst all the pain and desperation, I dropped the phone, which crashed to the floor and broke. Immediately after doing so, the light returned to the elevator, which continued on its way. My grandmother was no longer there. Terrified and disbelieving what had happened, I walked to my grandmother's house. Surely she was fine. Nothing that had happened made sense. This couldn't be real. As I entered her house, a deep smell of the dead invaded my nose. The police arrived at the same time I did, and upon seeing me, they recognized the smell and immediately pulled me out. They knew there was a dead body in that room. Soon after, my grandmother was confirmed dead. She had taken her own life in a ritual. From what the cops saw, the place was full of satanic drawings, and my grandmother had not died that day, but the corpse had been there for several days. During the investigation, they discovered that my grandmother was in a cult. There were also several pictures of me with black candles around them. As soon as they told me that, I remembered that the phone that broke that day was a gift from my grandmother. It was the only gift she gave me in her life, and she had done it with a big smile. Since that day, I only go down or up the stairs to my apartment. I could never take an elevator again.
As a hotel receptionist, I get to meet a lot of people. For the most part, it's an easy job. Unlike being into room service or the kitchen, a receptionist's job is straightforward. However, that does not mean we do not deal with our fair share of crazy customers. However, the story I'm about to tell you was the most bizarre and horrifying thing that had ever happened on my shift. So the hotel I work at is a 5-star hotel, including its own restaurant and whatnot. But it's also said to be the most haunted hotel in town. Now, being a receptionist, I have never experienced anything remotely paranormal in this place until this incident. Many of the staff members, especially the room service people, claim to have experienced a few things. Nothing major or life-threatening, but they have heard footsteps, felt like someone is watching them. They have heard weird noises and stuff like that. But now, most of the staff is desensitized to these things. We just do our job and move on. The hotel had 7 floors and a big rooftop to host events. The 4th floor had suites just like most of the other floors. Our hotel has 2 big elevators that go right from the basement to the rooftop. The staff as well as customers use these elevators. Each elevator has a CCTV camera in it that records who uses the lift at all times. One evening, I got a call from suite number 606. "Hello, you have reached the reception. How may I help you?" I asked. "The water from the shower is brownish. Why is it that way? Can you do something about it?" This was the first time someone had made that complaint. Surely there must be something malfunctioning. "Don't worry, ma'am. Please tell me your room number and I will ask someone to take a look." I hung up with her call and then asked a staff member to take a look. They checked the plumbing, and there was no issue with it. Everything seemed fine. No rust or leaks or breaks in the pipe for dirt to get into the water. So, similar complaints started flooding in. Many guests living in different suites were complaining about the bad water quality in the bathroom. Now, you must know hotels this big spend a good portion of their revenue each year on water purification and filtering. So this was a very unlikely scenario. When the plumbers could not detect the source of the brown water, they decided to do a more extensive search. Instead of checking the pipes, they decided to check in the big water tanks that hold the water. These tanks were situated in a secluded area on the rooftop, which is locked at all times. A few staff members accompanied these plumbers to the rooftops, and they began checking the outside of the tank first. When they found nothing out of the ordinary, they called, having decided to open the water tank, which is locked. The moment they opened the tank, the plumber who was going to check it from inside screamed and fell from the ladder he had used to get to the top of the tank. The rest of the people with him were confused. Soon the cops were called, and all the guests staying in the hotel were either moved to another hotel or ask not to use the shower and the bathroom at all. Exactly 4 days before this incident on January 22nd, 2020, Maria Lee had checked in for 4 days. I was the one who checked her in. Like most receptionists, I do not remember the name or faces of all the people who check in or check out, but I remember checking in Maria, just because she was the only Asian woman in the lobby that evening. Maria was very friendly, and it was her first time staying in our hotel. She was staying there alone and was expecting no company for the duration of her stay. She seemed like any normal guest you see living in a hotel. Whenever any of our guests experience something slightly weird, or should I say paranormal, their first reaction is to either call reception or try to find a staff member as soon as possible. So when Maria's swollen dead body was found floating face first in the big water tank on the roof, there were a lot of questions in the minds of the authorities as well as the staff members. As there were no calls made from her room to the reception, neither had any staff member seen her going towards the rooftop. Everyone was wondering how she got there. More so, when the tank was locked at all times, except while conducting regular maintenance. The reason for the brown water was her dead body, which was leaking bodily fluids into the water in the tank. But discovering her dead body wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was the things that were revealed during the investigation. Initially, all of the staff members, including me, were called in for questioning who had worked in the hotel during Maria's stay there. When the cops found no leads, they decided to check all the CCTV cameras in the hotel. Not much was found on the CCTV camera installed in the corridors or the main lobby, but the CCTV in the elevator had some solid footage. Many staff members had complained for ages that the elevator was probably the most haunted part of the hotel. In the CCTV footage, you could clearly see Maria entering the elevator on the 4th floor. She looks visibly scared and a lot shifty. She's in her pajamas and her hair open and barefoot. This was odd. When she got in the elevator, unlike normal people who press the floor they want to go to, Maria kept staring at the buttons for a few seconds. Then she pressed the button to the 7th floor. Suddenly, as the door to the elevator was about to close, she hid behind a metal panel, as if someone was after her. She was terrified, judging by the expression on her face. When the elevator doors closed completely, she started staring at her own reflection in the mirror. Suddenly, she crouched down in one corner, as if she had seen something terrifying in the mirror. When the elevator reached the 7th floor, as soon as the doors opened, she ran out of the elevator. She was captured by the CCTV cameras on the 7th floor, but that was the last time she was recorded. No camera had recorded her going to the rooftop, let alone the water tank. And then, her dead body was found. The forensics predicted that Maria died on the 23rd, which means a day after her arrival. To date, the case is open, and no one knows how Maria died, or what she was scared of and running away from. And the worst part was, how did she get into the locked water tank on the rooftop? Not even the best detectives were able to solve the case. However, some staff members who have worked in the hotel for over a decade say that this was done by the spirits that haunt the hotel. On the one hand, I personally do not believe anyone who says the evil spirits did it. But, on the other hand, there is no logical explanation as to how she might have died. Every day I work in this hotel, I keep wondering, what must have happened to Maria Lee?
For as long as I can remember, I've always been a big fan of the occult. I love paranormal stories. I watched all the horror movies you can imagine, and obviously, I even opened my own YouTube channel. Nowadays, I have to admit that I'm a bit removed from horror. I used to think nothing was scarier than the paranormal, the occult. Ghosts and ghouls seemed genuinely terrifying to me, and nothing could be worse than having a ghost haunting your family. Until one night, I realized how wrong I was. That night, I realized that reality trumps fiction. That night, I realized that I didn't have to be afraid of ghosts. I had to be afraid of people who are still alive. It all started one cold Friday morning. Halloween was a month away, but even so, I wanted to go ahead and order my costume. I didn't have a lot of money on me, so I wanted to do something simple, so I chose to dress up as Freddy Krueger. All I needed was a pullover, black jeans, a hat like his, and some hands with blades. I had thought of all the places to shop, so I chose everything on Craigslist and ordered it. When the order arrived, I was overjoyed. I would have a perfect costume for very little money. My wife is a special effects makeup artist, so I could make myself look a lot like Freddy. I went out to get my stuff, not knowing what I was about to find. The Craigslist delivery man was a normal man. No feature of his face was striking. His hairstyle was nothing special, and his physical build was unremarkable. Nothing about him was remarkable. So why he scared me so much was inexplicable. It was as if something around him gave him a bad feeling, as if a terrifying aura surrounded him. Trying to ignore my feeling, I went to get my things, and he spoke to me.
You having a costume party, aren't you?
As he said this, his face changed completely. The man flashed a huge grin from ear to ear. As he did so, all his facial features hardened. His eyes were still the same, but his gaze had changed. It was piercing and intimidating. He may have just asked me a simple question, but the words pierced my ears like blades. How do you know? Without answering me, he looked at the bag in the direction of Freddy's glove. Oh, of course, silly me. I am preparing in advance my Halloween costume, that's all.
You know, my friends and I like Halloween very much. We usually dress up as clowns.
That is cool.
Although for us, Halloween is all year round. Someday, I'll show you my costume. I'm sure you'll be delighted.
Yes, someday. Have a nice day. The man didn't answer me. He just kept staring at me with his huge smile. As I opened the door to my house, I could see him slowly raise his hand and waving it back and forth. He waved at me. I locked myself in the house and looked out the window. But when I did, he was gone. Uncomfortable, I showed my wife the things, and she was happy. I let her joy rub off on me and pretended nothing had happened. I let this encounter pass as something rare, something that would never happen again. Little did I know, that was far from over. A few nights later, my wife had left with her friends, so I was going to spend the night alone with my 4-year-old son. I was sitting there watching a horror movie when suddenly I heard a car pull up to my house. I thought my wife had arrived early, so I looked at the Ring camera, and there it was. A scary man dressed as a clown was walking slowly towards my house, making strange head movements and staring at my camera as he walked. This man was the Craigslist driver. The man quickly arrived at my house and immediately rang the doorbell over and over again as his ghoulish grin grew bigger and bigger. He knew I was home. He knew that each ring scared me more than the last. In desperation, I called the police and told them to come urgently, that there was a scary man dressed as a clown at my door. They told me to stay on the line, but I cut the phone to get my son, who was in his room. Before I went, I looked again at the Ring camera, and the clown was no longer there. I couldn't believe it. The man dressed as a clown had broken into my house. I didn't even try to fight. My only reaction was to go upstairs and into my son's room. The man on Craigslist may have caught up with me, but he didn't even try to chase me. He just followed me in slow motion, enjoying every step I took up the stairs. After covering the door with a piece of furniture, I locked myself in the room and hugged my son. The clown started banging violently on the door while laughing frenetically. My son and I stood hugging each other, crying. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it was something bad. Suddenly, the banging stopped, and I saw something slide under the door. It was a picture of my son sleeping through the night. There were also other pictures of me and my wife sleeping. The man had been in my house before. We just didn't know it. My blood froze and I didn't know how to react. I was stunned. After that silence, I heard several footsteps in my house until those footsteps came into the room. It was the police. The policemen who came told us that they did not see anyone in the house. When they arrived, it was already empty. After watching my Ring camera video, they told me that they had seen this clown in other films. Like other clowns, these people were harassing people. As a result of this, there were several disappearances and crimes. They were never able to identify the clown, and when I told them it was the same man from Craigslist, they were able to identify him, but never found him. Apparently, that was his last delivery. The next day, I changed all the locks, and within a year, I moved out. No matter how safe my house seemed, I could no longer live there knowing that my wife and son were in danger. From that day on, I could no longer watch horror movies, especially those with clowns in them. Maybe one day I will recover from what we experienced, but for now, I prefer to watch comedy movies.
This happened to me and my family when we were living in Kansas City, back in 2016. Clowns were all the rage, and scary clowns were a hot topic across the country. My wife Abby and I, and my son Nick, all lived in a nice house in a safe neighborhood. Every day in the news there was at least one piece of news relating to a scary clown. It was either a prank or a serious crime or something along that line. However, around Halloween of 2016 and 17, there were a lot of people dressed as clowns. It was funny and weird at the same time. My son Nick, who was 15 back then, dressed as a creepy clown too. My wife and I had a good laugh looking at our silly-looking son. But soon, things took a turn for the worse. Now, you must know something about me. I'm a banker, but my father was a cop, which means I knew a lot about the police in the States. And being the son of a cop, I always made sure that our house was secure, which means making sure all the locks and bolts on the doors and windows are working okay. The Ring camera and the one in our backyard are always on, etc. Abby always said that I exaggerated, but I just wanted to keep my family safe. Nothing wrong with that, right? A month after Halloween, there was a break-in into the house of an elderly couple that lived down the street. They said it was a clown carrying a machete. He threatened them and stole a bunch of valuables and money. The cops were working on the case when another break-in happened in one of the houses in our neighborhood. For the first time, a scary clown had struck our area. Now my wife was thanking me for being so serious about the security of our home. Although the neighborhood was on high alert, somewhere deep down I knew that the clown would strike a third time. Usually my wife and I slept in the master bedroom on the ground floor and my son slept in his room upstairs. But that day I decided to sleep on the couch in front of the TV. My wife was in our room and my son was fast asleep in his. Around 2 a.m, my phone chimed beside me on the couch. I had fallen asleep with the TV on, so I immediately woke up when the notification popped up. It was from the Ring camera. There was motion detected on our porch. I was immediately on high alert. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, and the scene I saw was straight out of a person's nightmare. There was a scary-looking clown on my front porch. He was just standing there, looking at the house. He also had a big machete in his hand, which he was holding right against his chest. He was dragging his right foot as if he had a limp. He was just acting weird, like a zombie. But I was the most scared when he stopped moving and noticed the Ring camera. He became as still as a rock and just kept looking into the camera. Then he moved his face close to it. That's when I lost it. I knew it was unsafe to go out and confront him. Even though my father had taught me how to fight, I was no match for a blade-wielding crazy guy. That's when I remembered that my wife loved to sleep with the window open. I looked at the footage of the camera and the clown wasn't there. I ran to our bedroom and spotted the open window. Abby was sleeping peacefully. I yanked the window closed, and then the clown emerged from the side of the house. He must have heard the noise of the window closing. He raised his machete and moved it across his neck, making the "I'll kill you" motion. "What happened, Brandon?" my sleepy wife asked from the bed. "Nothing, sweetie. You sleep." I didn't want to worry her. I grabbed my phone once again and climbed the stairs to my son's room. His window was locked and his blinds were drawn, which meant no one from the street should be able to spot him. I dialed 911 and told the operator my emergency. He said that the cops would be there in a few minutes. Almost 5 minutes after I hung up the phone, someone rang the doorbell. I saw the footage of the Ring camera on my phone and saw a cop standing in front of my door. He was looking into the camera and showing me his badge. He was saying something, but we didn't have speakers installed. It was weird that the cop was able to get there so fast, especially given on average that the time it takes for cops to get to our neighborhood is around 10 to 15 minutes. Plus, it was weird for a single cop to show up at your door at night. They usually have a partner with them. So instead of opening the door immediately, I looked at the footage for a while. That's when I noticed that he wasn't a cop. Rather, he was a detective. Throughout my childhood and teenage years, I'd been around enough cops and detectives to know that only police officers responded to 911 calls, and never a detective. So it was extremely odd for one to be on my porch. I kept watching the footage some more and noticed that the body language of that man was off. He might have dressed like a detective, but he wasn't one. He was someone else. That's when the man finally moved and walked a few steps away from the door. And to my utter shock, he had a limp in his right leg, too. In an instant, I knew what was going on. But before I could do anything, loud sirens could be heard down the road. The cops were here. The detective, or should I say the scary clown, ran like a madman across my front yard in the opposite direction, all the way limping and barely managing to go fast enough. This time, when the real cops knocked, I opened the door. The commotion had woken up my wife and son. I filled them in on what had happened. The cops told me that I was super smart not to open the door the second time when the fake cop showed up. They told us that the same thing had happened at different parts of the city, and that the scary clown or fake cop had even killed a woman who was naive enough to open the door. A citywide search was going on for this man, and the footage from our Ring camera had helped the cops get the face of the criminal. Just a year later, we moved from Kansas to Montana, but the clown was never caught. But after that day, he didn't torment anyone else or loot any other houses. My overprotective attitude saved my family and many other families who could have been the victim after us. But that clown's face was the scariest thing I had ever caught on the Ring camera. Ever. So next time when someone rings your doorbell at night or knocks on your door, check before you open the door, or you could become a victim of a scary criminal.
Being a single mom of 2 twin boys is tough, especially if your kids are 3-year-old toddlers. They are hyperactive and are always in need of supervision. So just to be safe, I installed cameras all around the house. I'm a working mom, and I have to make sure the kids are safe in the house with the nanny while I go to work. Being a single mom also means between work, looking after the kids, and chores, I hardly get any time to shop for groceries or do anything for myself. So I mostly rely on food and grocery delivery services. DoorDash is one of my favorites. They are quick and deliver whenever I need stuff, no matter what time it is. Oftentimes, I order stuff from DoorDash while I'm at work, and the nanny takes the delivery for me. My twin sons, Alex and Adam, love home-cooked food, so I try to make meals from scratch as frequently as possible. They also like to play a lot, so I have a small park in the backyard for them. It has a kiddie pool, slides, a set of swings, and a trampoline. It's a good place to host playdates and small parties for kids as well. Sometimes while I'm at work, I like to watch my kids play in the park through the CCTV camera app. Also, we live in an area where wild animals often visit us, so a motion detection alert from the Ring camera and the backyard camera helps us to be safe. However, last month, something very scary happened. Every evening I get home by 6, and I spend the rest of my day with my kids, and by 8:30 I make sure they are in bed. Mostly due to all the activities they do throughout the day, they fall asleep after dinner. Then I do chores around the house, clean up behind them, and rarely enjoy a glass of red wine by the fireplace while reading a book. But that day was especially exhausting because the nanny had left early and I had to rush around the evening traffic to get back home to my kids. I made us dinner and made sure they were asleep. Afterwards, I hardly had any energy to do anything else, so I went to bed. Sometime around 3 a.m., I suddenly woke up. Someone was ringing the bell and knocking on the front door. I was terrified for a second, but then I heard a woman.
Please open your door. It's your DoorDash delivery.
But I had not ordered anything on DoorDash. Or had I? Sometimes all the work made me forgetful, so I checked my phone, and sure enough, I hadn't ordered anything. And why would I order anything at that ungodly hour? I thought about opening the door and letting the poor delivery girl know that she had the wrong address. That's when I received a notification on my phone. There was motion detected in our backyard in my kids' play area. I wondered if it was a deer or, God forbid, a bear. Those things would come around once in a while to soak in the kiddie pool. So instead of going out of the house, I checked the live footage on the camera in the backyard, and I just sat in my bed frozen. There were 4 men in my backyard right outside my kids' window, trying to break into the house. I was alone with my kids and I had no firearms with me.
Please open the door. I have other deliveries. I do not have all night.
The DoorDash girl was practically yelling now and banging on the door. Often, if there was no one to pick up the order, the DoorDash delivery person would just leave the stuff by the door, so this woman had no need to be so aggressive. The 4 men were wearing dark hoodies with hoods pulled up and a mask covering their faces. I couldn't see their faces through the cam, but I was scared shitless. That's when I switched to my Ring camera and saw the woman. She might not have spotted my Ring camera because she was constantly looking to the left, where there is a path leading to my backyard, and gesturing for something. It seemed like she was part of the gang as well, but at that moment, my first concern was protecting Alex and Adam. So I got out of bed, padded towards the kitchen, and grabbed a knife. Then I headed to the kids' bedroom and immediately heard the people trying to break in from outside. Before calling the cops, I had to make sure my kids were safe. Luckily, we had a basement where we could hide till the police arrived in case those people succeeded on breaking in.
Hey, Alex, Adam, wake up. We need to play a game.
I whispered to my kids, praying the people outside did not hear me. My kids are dead sleepers, so they did not budge. So instead of waking them, I picked up Alex and ran downstairs as fast as I could without making any sound. Then I came back up for Adam, and soon all 3 of us were in the basement. Both of them were sleeping in 2 old lawn chairs while I paced the room, trying to call 911. The operator assured me that I had done the right thing and I should shut the basement door and have a weapon in case things went south. No matter the circumstance, was I supposed to come up until the cops were at my door. I hung up the phone and then stared at the live footage on the phone. Those people were still trying, but they had no tools, so it was tough to open the window or the door. The DoorDash girl was not helping them. I was still praying, wishing they did not damage my home or harm me and my kids. A few minutes later, I saw the people argue amongst themselves. 2 of them climbed the fence and walked away. 3 others, including the DoorDash girl, followed once they realized the doors and windows were shut tight. 15 minutes later, the cops showed up, and finally, Adam and Alex woke up too. I brought them upstairs and told the cops what happened. I also showed them the footage.
According to the footage, it looks like the gang had a plan in place. The DoorDash girl was the first part of the plan. If you opened the door for her, the rest of the 4 people would have ambushed you and force-entered the house. But when you did not open the door, the people started to find alternative ways into the house. But when they realized the locks were unbreakable, they abandoned the mission and ran away. From the looks of it, these people are novices at this. They may have even been teenagers trying to cause some chaos. Nevertheless, it's best you hid in the basement. You never know what those people wanted. Also, henceforth, be careful. And good thing you invested in a good security system.
With that, the cops did a perimeter check and left. Never in my life had I ever been so scared for myself and my kids. But I was happy that we got out of it unscathed.
Hey, my name is Gene. Like most of you, I love pizza. There's nothing better to eat on a Saturday than a huge pizza, right? Well, now I'll tell you something we certainly do not have in common. I never order pizza delivery. I always go to pick it up because since that rainy day, I don't want anything to do with pizza delivery guys. That day, it was a normal day. Don't confuse me. I was looking forward to Saturday. Those days I stayed home watching horror movies and started pizza. But then again, that's what I did every Saturday. I have a lot of friends, but after a week of studying and working, I usually want to relax. That rainy day, I did the same thing I always do. I ordered pizza and prepared a horror movie. I was waiting for the pizza to arrive, but to my surprise, a few minutes after I ordered it, the delivery guy was already at my door. When I went to open the door, I had a very bad feeling. There was something wrong with the pizza delivery guy. His eyes were focused on me. He was staring at me in a very nervous way. The man was breathing very heavily and wasn't even looking to protect himself from the rain. He was just standing under it, staring at me. Before I opened the door, I asked the man to wait for a moment as I had forgotten my keys. He didn't answer me. He just stared at me in a frightening way, smiling a big smile. Once I entered my house, I quickly called the pizzeria and asked him if my order had gone out. If this was one of his delivery men. I was shocked by their response. The girl at the pizzeria said no. She told me that they are running late. She told me that they are running late because of the rain and they didn't even start making it. Before I could answer her, the phone was cut off along with the power. I was totally in the dark. I looked out quickly to see if the man was still in the rain waiting for me, but no, there was no one outside. There was no one outside. I went to look for my cell phone, but it was totally out of charge. I always had this terrible habit of letting the battery run out and just charging it at that moment. But this time, I would really pay the consequences of that. I went to the kitchen and looked for a knife to defend myself. Was I being paranoid? Was it all just a huge coincidence? No, it couldn't be. The man tried to deliver a pizza that wasn't meant for me. He knew I had ordered it, but still, it could be a joke. Surely the light would be back soon. As if to answer my question, I heard glass breaking and ran into the dining room. The window was open. Someone had smashed it with a rock and used his hand to open it. In the darkness, I could see parts of my dining room wet. Someone came in from outside. I was not alone. I thought about going outside and running out into the rain. But what if it was a trap? What if that scary person was waiting for me outside? I began to ask myself what I should do, and I paid for that doubt dearly. A man came out of the darkness and started choking me from behind. Why was he doing this to me? I had no problems with anyone. I had never made any enemies, nor was I conspicuous enough to be attacked. I struggled to free myself and managed to push the man away, who only took a step back with a big smile on his face. At that moment, I realized that the man wasn't squeezing too hard. I don't think I got free on my own. He let me go. I ran desperately towards the broken window, but before I got there, I fell backward. The man behind me was not the only pizza delivery man. There were about 5 more coming through the window. The men grabbed me and dragged me to the center of the dining room. The light illuminated them enough that they could see me perfectly. I was surrounded. I had no way out of this. Synchronistically, everyone opened their pizza boxes and pulled out markers from inside. As if they had done it before, they began to draw symbols on my body in a perfectly synchronized manner. My body started to burn a lot, not because their strange ritual was working, but because they were passing the markers with such force and violence that it felt like it was burning my whole body. The pain became more and more intense, until from one second to the next, I stopped feeling it. I began to lose consciousness and fade away at the mercy of these terrifying men, knowing that I might never wake up again. But to my surprise, I did. When I opened my eyes, there was a pizza delivery man in front of me, but he wasn't evil. He was Wally. The pizza delivery guy I had originally ordered was standing in front of me, soaking wet and calling the police. Once the police arrived, there was no sign of the men. Although I had no ring door camera, many neighbors filmed these people, but the police could never find them. From that day on, I never felt alone again. I feel watched at all times, and sometimes I know I am. Sometimes I see people spying on me in the street. They don't even try to hide that they see me. They just do it. Unfortunately, this is not the worst of my worries. Since that day, I feel that something else is stalking me. A presence that appears in my house when I am in the dark. Something that takes more and more shape and is getting closer and closer to catching me. I try not to think about it, to always be with people and never be in the dark. But every time someone wants to order pizza, I remember that horrible rainy night and I tell them no. We can order pizza, but I'll be the one to go get it.
Hi, I'm Jordan Boatman. I'm a nurse and a part-time pizza delivery boy. As I'm studying medicine, working in a hospital as a nurse and also delivering pizzas at night, I barely get time to do anything else. My job as a nurse is to gain experience, whereas my job delivering pizzas for a 24/7 pizza house is to earn money. I have to pay my student debt and also continue studying medicine. I mostly work from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., which means I'm all night driving around town delivering pizzas. Now, it's surprising how many people order pizzas at odd times. In a nutshell, it's too many. And if you work at the only 24/7 restaurant in town, it means you work a lot at night. It's mostly partying teenagers, people who do remote jobs for foreign companies, or sometimes people craving a midnight snack, or should I say a meal. However, whenever I have a rough day at my college or in the hospital, I prefer to operate the phone and the order app instead of driving around town delivering pizzas. I've been working in this restaurant for over 2 years, so it's safe to say I can do everything here, right from delivering pizzas to making them. Recently, we hired a new kid. He must be, 18 or 19 years old. He's new in town and drives pretty well, so we decided to let him do the night deliveries. He insisted he would be okay with driving around in order to get to know the town. For the last 2 months, he's done a great job. Not a single complaint. No late deliveries, just happy customers. He'd quickly become everyone's favorite. Mine personally, as he more often than not let me study at the counter and did my deliveries for me. However, a week ago, everything changed. That night, as I was on the counter picking up the phone and checking the apps for orders, the phone rang. "Hello, SSG Pizza Palace. What's your order?" I said. "Hi, I'm Stacy, and I'd like to order a large pepperoni pizza. a regular cheese pizza and garlic bread and mustard dip on the side. Sure, your delivery will be there in 30 minutes. If it's late, it's on the house. Would you please give the address where the food is to be delivered? Yeah, house number 87, near the post office, on 4th Street. When I heard her say 4th Street, I was a bit worried, but quickly concealed my discomfort and replied, "Thanks, your order will reach you shortly," and hung up the phone. I forwarded the order to the kitchen and decided to deliver this order myself. It was clear that there was no point in letting Luke, the new boy, deliver this order. Although I had a few assignments pending and was exhausted after my shift in the hospital, the order was ready in about 10 minutes. "Hey, is the order ready?" Luke asked. "Yeah, it is, but I'm taking this one. You can wait for the next one." "Why? Do they tip well?" Luke asked me playfully. "No, it's not about the tip. Let's just say you'd rather not go in that part of town at night. Or ever." "Oh, why is that?" "Do they sell drugs there?" Luke said, almost hopeful, but I wasn't going to tell him the real reason. "No, they don't sell drugs there." "Oh, then why shouldn't I go? Let me deliver this order. You have a ton of homework anyways." I mean, he was correct, but still, it was too risky to let the new kid do this. "No, Luke, I'm taking this order. A few minutes of delay won't set me back on my studies." "But you have an assignment due tomorrow, and I'll deliver this order. Don't worry." After that, Luke kept begging and whining for a while, so I finally let him take the order, but on one condition. "Luke, you have to promise me that you will drive straight to the address and back. At no point will you get out of the car. No matter what happens, you will not get out of the car." He looked at me as I was stressed about this delivery, and I instructed him about the route. Luke sensed that there was something I wasn't telling him. "Why are you so worried about this? Is there something I should know?" I know I should have told him, but I didn't. I didn't want to scare him. Moreover, he had to be ready to deliver anywhere in the city when I became a full-time medical professional. "No, there's nothing you should know. Just be careful and remember my instructions." "Sure. Okay. Bye." With that, Luke drove away. I returned to my counter and continued working on my assignment, with one eye on the app screen to check for new orders. Around 20 minutes later, the phone rang. "Hello, SSG Pizza Palace. What's your order?" I said as usual. "Hi. Hey, it's Stacy. I'm calling from house number 87, 4th Street. Why's my order not here yet?" "Wait, what do you mean? The delivery guy left almost 20 minutes ago. He should have delivered your order and returned by now." "Well, I haven't received my order yet." Now I was worried, almost panicked. I knew something was terribly wrong, but I was still hoping that maybe there was a rational explanation as to why he was late. I picked up my own cell phone and dialed his number. It rang a few times and then went straight to voicemail. That's when I knew for sure something was wrong, as the kid always picked up his calls. I ran towards my car, got in, and drove towards 4th Street. As I was driving, I was constantly looking everywhere on the way to see if I could spot Luke's car, but I found nothing. Until I reached the place I most dreaded. I didn't want Luke to be here, and definitely not at 2 in the morning. But as I pulled my car on the crossroad, I saw Luke's car, parked beside the phone booth. I knew it was foolish of me to get out of the car at that spot, but I was hell-bent on saving Luke. As I got near the phone booth, I saw a figure leaning against the blur and stained glass of the phone booth, and I instantly knew what or who it was. I opened the glass door, and Luke fell into my arms. He was struggling to breathe and drenched from head to toe. He couldn't talk, but he looked at me as if I just saved him from an extremely painful death. I immediately called 911, and within minutes, there were paramedics there to take him to a hospital. Later, I delivered the order that was still somehow warm in his car. I knew what had happened to him, and I blame myself for putting him in that situation. The next day, I visited him in the hospital, and he was in critical condition. His family was there in the lobby when I met him. His mom thanked me for saving his life, but little did she know, I was the one who put him in that condition. The doctors predicted that he was in that condition because his lungs were full of water and he was drowning from the inside out. No one knew how so much water got into his lungs, and he didn't have any lung diseases. But I knew exactly what had happened there, as a long time ago, the same thing had happened to me too. You see, a long time ago this town wasn't too big, and there was a small lake where 4th Street is now. And in order to expand the town, the government and the mayor had forcefully evacuated people living there. But some people who refused to give up their lands and their houses were tied by the cruel mayor and drowned in the lake. As revenge, it's believed that the spirits of those people haunt that area. I myself never believed in this story, until one night I was 17 and driving home from the library at around 3 a.m. Although there was hardly any cars on the road at that time, I stopped my car at the red light on the same crossroad. While I was waiting for the light to turn green, I saw the phone booth, and as soon as my eyes landed on the old green booth, the phone inside started ringing. It was odd at first because no one calls a random phone booth, and secondly, not at 3 in the morning. So I decided to get out and pick up the phone. As soon as I entered the booth, I picked up the phone. There was static coming from the other end of the line. Hello? Who is it? I spoke into the line, but no reply. I figured someone must be joking, so I hung up the phone and pushed the door to get out of the booth. However, the door wouldn't budge. I tried to push it open, but nothing. I was stuck in the booth. I tried to break the glass, but it seemed bulletproof. I banged on the door, but at that time it was highly unlikely someone would pass by me to even notice I was stuck. Nevertheless, I kept on trying. Suddenly my lungs started to fill up, and it was like I was drowning. I gasped for air, and it felt like I was drowning in a lake. That's when someone yanked the door open, and I collapsed into that person's arms. To this day, I have no clue who it was, but all I knew was that the next day I was in my bed. I had not suffered as severely as Luke, but I know the dread that fills you when you feel your lungs filling with water. I researched what this was. The next day in the library, I found an urban legend about the town. It said that that phone booth was a portal used by the spirits of the people killed by the mayor to communicate with the living, and they want to punish the people living in this town. The phone rings at random hours, mostly at night, and when someone enters the booth to pick up the phone, that person's lungs fill with water, and he drowns from the inside out, the same way those people died. Although I never shared this with anyone to date, but throughout the years, multiple people have died in the same booth and in the same way. I don't know whether Luke will survive or not, but I hope he does. Please, pray for him. Pizza delivery horror story. Do you know what it's like to live in a family of people who love pizza? Well, if you don't, let me tell you, they eat a lot of pizzas. And because of that, when I got a chance to work at a pizza place during my summer in high school, my whole family was happy. Usually, once my shift ended at around 11 or 12 in the night, I used to carry some leftover pizza home for my family. Sometimes I used to work in the kitchen, and on other days I used to deliver pizzas. I love doing both. Making delicious pizzas and then being able to hand over the order to the waiting hungry customers. What could be better? I live in a small town, which means I know most of the people living here. The people who order pizza from our place are the locals whom I probably already know. So it's always a pleasure to see a familiar face when delivering the pizzas. Once my shift is over, I take a bus home, as I don't own a car, and it's nice to just sit quietly after my shift. The bus service has been going on in our town since the early 1980s. The driver is the same person, Mr. Anderson. He's almost 60 years old, and he's been the driver of the bus since it started. Although at night there are hardly any passengers on the bus other than me, Mr. Anderson still stops the bus at every bus stop on the route. Many times there is no one getting down or getting on the bus at several stops. Still, instead of driving right past those stops, Mr. Anderson makes it a point to stop at every bus stop on the route. The thing about this bus route, though, is that there are a lot of cemeteries on the way, and most of the stops are in front of these cemeteries. I admit, as a 19-year-old man, I'm a bit scared when the bus stops in front of a dark old cemetery. Mostly you just see trees and the headstones of the graves. But hiding behind all that is a darkness that you feel within you. It was always creepy when Mr. Anderson stopped the bus for no one on each and every one of those bus stops. Initially, I always sat alone, but a few months ago, a young guy around my age started getting on the bus too. He got in a few stops after mine, and although before it was awkward, we soon became good friends. Given that most of the time we were the only two passengers on the bus, it was easy. I learned that his name was Neil. He studied engineering at Caltech and was back in town due to summer vacation. He was working at the local library, and his shift ended around mine too. Every day he used to get on the bus in front of one of the cemeteries, which was closest to the library, and sit on the seat opposite of mine. We used to talk till my stop arrived. "So, how was work?" Neil asked me that day. "You know, same old. What about you?" The library is usually slow after sunset. Only students come in. "That must be nice, having less work to do." "I'd rather work at the pizza place, for all the free pizza I can get." "Anyways, why are you carrying these big boxes?" "Today my parents and siblings wanted to throw a pizza party at our house, so they decided to just call my pizza place and place the order for a bunch of pizzas. And as I go home, I'm also delivering the pizzas to them." After hearing my story, Neil laughed out loud. "Man, your folks are hilarious. They're making you work even as you come home. Also, you must be the first pizza delivery boy delivering pizzas by bus." It was indeed funny that I was delivering pizzas to my own home, and that too, it was by bus. That's when the bus stopped at another stop and an old man got into the bus. He had a walking stick in his hand and sat way ahead of us on a seat closer to the driver. He didn't punch a ticket, which was weird. He just sat there, still as a rock. "What's an old guy doing on the bus so late?" Neil whispered to me what I was thinking. "I don't know. I've never seen him on the bus before. Maybe he wants to go somewhere urgent." "It's possible," I confirmed, and we both just sat there whispering about the old man. Suddenly, Neil asked me, "Hey, do you know why this bus stops at every stop even though there are no passengers?" This was a question that plagued me since the day I started riding on this night bus. "No, I don't know. Do you know the reason?" "Yeah, I actually do. You see, in the early 1980s, when the bus service was started, there was a plague in this town and a few neighboring towns too. Many people died due to this disease, and all of them were buried in these cemeteries. It's believed that this night bus is not only used by the living, but also by the dead, lying in these cemeteries." Instantly, we both looked at the old man sitting in front of us on the bus. While Neil was telling me the story, we had passed a few stops, and as usual, no one had got on the bus, even though Mr. Anderson had stopped the bus at every stop. The old man was no longer on the bus. It was just us and the driver. This scared me so much that I barely managed to go home with my pizzas. For the next week or so, I didn't go to work in order to avoid the bus ride home at night. Even though I missed Neil, it was just too terrifying. Encountering the spirit of the old man on the bus was scary as shit. But duty calls, and I had a job to get back to. That night when my shift ended, I was dreading to get on the bus. But when I got on the bus, and I sat in the same spot waiting for Neil to get on the bus too, so that I could have some company. But he never did. Instead, the old man I had seen a week before got on the bus and sat on the same seat. Too close to the driver, I literally froze. I thought I was seeing the same spirit again, and that it had followed me somehow. However, this time, I couldn't take my eyes away from this man. A few stops later, he got up and prepared to get down from the bus and wished Mr. Anderson good night. But before the bus stopped, the old man turned and looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Who were you talking to the other day?
You were whispering the whole time while I was on the bus.
This threw me off balance, and that's when I realized that the old man wasn't a spirit, but Neil was. This scared me even more. But this time, instead of being a coward and skipping work, I went to the library Neil worked at and asked about him. The librarian told me that Neil Gunderson worked here for a few weeks but died due to a car accident and was buried in the cemetery a few weeks ago. When I did the math in my head, I realized that it was at the same time that he started taking the bus with me. That means that all along, Neil was a spirit who was using the bus service to get to his destination too.
I'll be honest, I never believed in the paranormal. I always believed that paranormal videos were made by people pulling strings behind the camera, Photoshop, or video editing. I always said I would believe in the paranormal if I saw something that convinced me. I never thought I would regret anything so much in my life. It all started when my daughter moved into my apartment. I had recently moved out as I had separated from my wife and she had taken the house. She was on vacation, so I was going to take care of Amy for 2 weeks. Amy and I had always been very close, and we were both looking forward to spending this time together. It was going to be a great 2 weeks with just the two of us together. I never imagined there would be 3 of us. The first 2 days, nothing out of the ordinary had happened. But on the 3rd day, Amy was behaving strangely. She was playing and talking to someone in her room. When I went over to ask her who she was talking to, she told me she was playing with Vincent. I never imagined her as the type of girl who would have an imaginary friend, but it's not something that bothered me. I let her keep playing. What's the worst that could happen? As the days went by, Amy became more and more distant from me. She didn't treat me badly or seem angry, but she was very distracted by her imaginary friend. She spent all day talking to Vincent, so much that I was starting to worry, and that worry would grow even more when it was time to eat. Amy asked me to put 3 plates on the table instead of 2, and I hesitantly agreed. She also asked me to cook something else, since Vincent didn't like macaroni and cheese, and that's when I decided to draw the line. I told Amy that Vincent had to eat what I had known. But just so I wouldn't be too cruel to her, I served her imaginary friend a plate of food. I went to get the drink from the fridge, but suddenly, a plate full of macaroni flew next to me, smashing into the wall next to the fridge. When I turned around, furious, I saw that Vincent's plate was gone. I got very angry with Amy, but she told me that she had nothing to do with what happened, that it was Vincent. Angry, she challenged her imaginary friend, which made me even angrier. Despite my anger, I decided not to say anything to her. I would have a talk with her, but since she had been with me so long ago, I preferred to be more permissive. The next day was Friday, and I had promised Amy that I would take her to the video games during the night. I went shopping for just a few minutes. She was taking a nap and could definitely take care of herself for a few minutes. When I came back, I couldn't believe what I saw. The kitchen was destroyed. All the dishes were destroyed. The chairs on the floor and the cutlery scattered everywhere. Furious, I yelled for the first time to Amy. She again told me it wasn't her fault. It was her imaginary friend. I was furious and sent her to bed without going to the games. She, between furious and sad, locked herself in her room to cry. Minutes later, I felt really bad about what I had done. I had never yelled at Amy like that, and I didn't want to start right now. I was thinking about going to her room and forgiving her. I was sure she had learned her lesson. Before going to her, I checked the security cameras in the kitchen. It's not that if I doubted the imaginary friend was true, I just wanted to show the footage to Amy so she would understand not to lie to me. What I didn't know was that she really wasn't lying to me. As I watched the footage, I didn't see Amy. The kitchen was destroying itself. It was as if something invisible was taking out my entire kitchen, destroying it bit by bit with indescribable force. I ran to the kitchen. I needed to see everything again. As I did, I realized that this could not have been Amy's doing. The chairs were broken, and some of the dishes from very high places were on the floor. There's no way Amy could have gotten there, not even by climbing on a chair. As I was going through everything, I found a strange photo on the floor, and I bent down to pick it up. In that photo was a terrifying 6-foot-tall man. Next to him, there was a frightened-looking woman, and in the middle, a little boy. A frightened little boy. Behind the photo, someone had written something by hand. Family photo, Alfonso, Maria, and Vincent. Could it be that child was Vincent? I went to Amy's room and showed her the photo without telling her my suspicions. But she just spoke.
Oh, you found Vincent's picture.
It was true. That boy was Vincent. This couldn't be true. There had to be a logical explanation. But that video, I had no way of denying that this was happening. Trying to understand a little more, I tried to get some information out of Amy, but I never would have expected her to tell me what she told me.
Sweetie, what does your little friend want? What did he tell you?
No, but he just told me something.
Is he here with you right now?
Yes.
Hey, what's the matter? What did he say?
He said you ask a lot of questions. He said he wants to hurt you. He's saying a lot of bad words to you. He's very angry.
Tell your friend to calm down. I won't hurt him.
You should stop calling him little. I don't think he likes it. He's very, very tall.
Confused, I showed her the picture again and pointed to the child. Didn't you just say that this is Vincent? Startled, she grabbed my finger and wagged it up, pointing to the terrifying 6-foot man behind him.
No, this is Vincent.
My blood froze. Almost at the same time, I began to feel something behind me. It was air. It was a breath. Someone was breathing on the back of my neck.
Daddy, I'm scared.
All this time, the imaginary friend was real. But he wasn't a child, but a terrifying, nearly 6-foot-tall grown man. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew we had to escape from there. I ran to the door to get out of the kitchen. My daughter was standing behind him, but the door slammed in my face. Suddenly, all the stuff in the kitchen started flying at me, hurting me as I tried to force the door open. I pushed as hard as I could until I managed to break it. Amy was standing there, crying. I pulled her into my arms and ran as fast as I could. I reached the exit door, and as I reached for the key and opened the door, something behind us approached. It was like a distortion in the air that was slowly approaching us, breaking everything in its path. I managed to open the exit door and ran with my daughter. We went down the stairs without waiting for the elevator. All the lights behind us were going out. The light bulbs were breaking, and even though there was no one behind us, we heard violent and loud footsteps that were getting closer and closer. We opened the exit door and ran as fast as we could to my car. Behind us, at the apartment doors, I caught my first glimpse of a man standing in the doorway. The man had a terrifying smile and cruel red eyes. The rest of his face was sunk in a black shadow, and from one second to the next, he disappeared. That was the last time I went back to that apartment. I went to my ex-wife's house while she was on vacation and looked for a new place to move to. I hired several people to move everything out of that apartment. I never had an explanation for what was happening, but at least I had the video of what happened in the kitchen to prove that it was real. Unfortunately, no one ever believed me. With so many fake videos on the internet, I can't blame them either.
Back when I lived in New York, I lived in an apartment with 3 other guys. All of us were working professionals, and our home was nothing short of a bachelor's pad. However, we all made sure to keep it as clean as possible. But it was tough to always keep the place immaculate, given our busy schedules. So we all found a middle ground by sharing chores. I didn't mind doing laundry. One of the other guys, Joseph, loved to cook. That left Max with the cleaning duties. His job was to sweep and mop the apartment once in a while and wash all the utensils. Although we weren't the best of friends, we had a good relationship. We often went out for dinners and drinks, watched sports together, and always helped each other pick up the slack around the house. However, there was something unusual about this apartment. Many times when one of us was alone in the apartment, we had seen a shadow of a woman. It wasn't scary or anything, but the female shadow could be spotted in various corners from time to time. I'd always been a little scared of all such supernatural things, so I just ignored the presence for the most part. But if it was too persistent, I just went into another room. The three of us often discussed this entity, but Joseph and I were never too affected by this woman. However, Max often had nightmares. He used to wake up sweaty, tired, and sometimes screaming. Joseph and I tried to make him feel better, but nothing changed. Max had nightmares about this dark female entity a couple of nights every week. However, moving into a new apartment wasn't an option as our current apartment had cheap rent. We couldn't afford to move out. His dreams always included this female entity sitting on his chest and choking him. He could never see her face other than big, white eyes. I often thought he was experiencing sleep paralysis, but after visiting the doctor, it was quickly ruled out. There was one more unique thing that used to happen in our apartment. Max preferred doing the dishes either in the morning or late at night, but many times the dishes used to be washed. We all knew that none of us were doing the dishes, so we quickly deduced that probably the poltergeist was doing this. However, as the days passed, many of Max's trivial tasks around the house were complete without any one of us doing them. It soon became a standing joke in our apartment. We often commented, saying that we would love the help of the poltergeist too, but that never happened. However, as the days passed, we could see the entity affecting Max, but we were helpless. That's when Max's mother got to know about this thing. Max's mom was a unique woman. She was strong-willed and a positive person. We had met her a few times when she came to visit Max in New York. She had told Max to leave the job and come back home. Joseph and I supported this decision as Max had become borderline crazy. So instead of just being jobless at home, he started looking for a new job. Given his experience, he found a new job in Houston, his hometown. He was on a notice period in his current job. Joseph and I were helping him pack his things for the big move back home. Even though Max loved being in New York, it was best for his mental health that he returned back home, away from this entity. Only a week before his flight back to Houston, Max feels violently ill. He had a high fever and was vomiting blood. Joe and I took him to the doctor, but after doing the checkups and running tests, they found nothing. On a physical level, Max was okay, so they gave him some medication and sent him back home. However, the fever did not subside and his puking continued. He couldn't eat, let alone drink. Joe and I were trying our best, but we were seeing this dark entity more frequently than normal. She was always there, and we could see her in the corner of our eyes. We knew for sure that she was affecting Max. 2 days before his flight, Max got up yelling in the morning, but this time it wasn't a nightmare because we knew he had barely slept but for a couple of hours. He told us to turn him flat on his belly, and when we did that, we saw 3 long red scratches on his back, like a wild dog had scratched him. We knew that this wasn't a medical emergency, rather, we needed a totally different kind of help. So not knowing what to do, I called Max's mom while Joe took care of Max's wounds. Max's mom was a very religious woman. She contacted her church's priest and narrated the whole story. The priest said that the spirit belonged to a woman who had died in the apartment many years ago. She had many unfinished wishes, which she was trying to fulfill through Max. Honestly, I didn't understand much of that, but what the priest said at the end has been etched in my brain forever. He told us that in order to free Max from the grasp of the spirit, it was essential to get him out of that apartment. Not only is the spirit attached to Max, but it was attached to the apartment, too. He said it would be forced to let go of Max if he moved out, but the entity will make it very difficult for Max to leave the place. So, all we have to do is get Max well enough to get on the flight. Even though I wasn't a religious person, I prayed for those 2 days to be well. Finally, on the morning of his flight, he was okay. He still had a bit of a temperature, but he was well enough to travel. Joe and I dropped him off at the airport and left only when his flight departed. But that wasn't the worst part. The moment we returned back to the apartment, everything was destroyed. Most of the electronics were broken, and our things were either on the floor or just flat out destroyed. We didn't need to guess who had done this, but this was too much for us to take. The entity had harassed Max enough that he was forced to leave New York. Joe and I knew that now that Max was gone, one of us could be the next target of this entity, so we started to look for new apartments. In a few days, we found a new apartment and we moved into it quickly, leaving the haunted place behind. A few years ago, I heard that a tenant living in that apartment hung herself. She was a teenage girl, and I instantly knew what could have happened. Somehow, I feel lucky that we moved out of the apartment in time, and to date, Joe, Max, and I joke about the poltergeist that haunted our apartment, and we still joke about how the entity used to do Max's chores. None of us could ever understand why, though.
It's perfect. Those were the words that came out of my mouth after I had been shown the tour of my new apartment. I was 22 at the time, and I was going to college in the city. Like most big cities, finding a good apartment seemed impossible, as I had been searching for months, and it wasn't till the last week of the 4th month that I found something I really liked. To be honest, I was shocked no one had snatched it up already. It had a spacious living room, a usable kitchen, enough bathrooms, and a perfect bedroom. I loved everything about it. Well, almost everything. The air in the apartment was a bit thick, and this was because of the numerous perfumed air fresheners that were situated all over the apartment. I didn't know why the place needed that many air fresheners, but it was the only mandatory thing that my landlord, Mr. Terrence, asked for. My opinions on my landlord, Mr. Terrence, were pretty normal. He was an awkward but quiet guy, which was a bit weird to me, as he had a really huge build, so his character didn't match his appearance. As he stood in the apartment with me, Mr. Terrence looked at me and said, "So that's it, Nathan. Remember to leave the air fresheners on every day, in addition to spray a new can in the living room every morning before you leave." He then handed me a box filled with new air fresheners. The obsession with the perfumed air fresheners was a bit weird to me, but I didn't say a word, seeing as he offered this apartment to me for a very low price. To be honest, the low price was another thing that was odd to me, as the apartment was a bit on the fancier side and it clearly cost more than that. So I was really shocked when he immediately agreed to let me live there for the low rent fee that I could offer. And I could recall that during our first meeting, it really seemed like he just wanted someone to live there. But I wasn't complaining because I saw it as a huge win for me, and after settling in, I slept happily that night in my new apartment. So it had been a couple of weeks since I moved into the new apartment, and while I still loved the place, I noticed a couple of strange things that were going on. For starters, I noticed that the other tenant who lived in the building actively avoided my apartment like a plague. I remember spending days wondering why they did that. At first, I thought they were just jealous of my place, but as time went by, I realized that it wasn't jealousy. These people were truly terrified of my apartment, and the look of fear on their faces every time they crossed the hall said it all. Due to this strange behavior, the only people who visited my apartment were my friends from college. On one particular day when I was coming back home, I overheard some of the tenants talking about my place, and through the course of the conversation, I heard them call it the cursed apartment. Now, I wasn't one to believe petty gossip, but I would be lying if I said the strange rumors didn't worry me. That night, I went to bed trying to get some sleep, but I kept thinking about what I heard earlier. So in order to get more comfortable, I turned in my bed to assume a better sleeping position. But as I was turning, out of the corner of my eye, I could see the silhouette of a huge man looming over me. The terrifying sight made my heart skip as I tried my best to muffle a scream. From the slight glimpse, I could tell the man was a lot bigger than me, so a direct confrontation would surely end badly for me. But I also knew that lying still and pretending to sleep wasn't a smart idea, as the intruder was bound to attack sooner or later. So I planned out the last best option in my head, and I put it into action. With no hesitation, I threw my blanket towards the intruder. Stunned that I was awake, he made an attempt to grab me, but the blanket I threw at him bought me some time, and within seconds, I ran at full speed towards my bathroom. Once I was safely inside, I locked the door and called the cops, screaming. While the cops were on their way, I listened at the door to see if the intruder was making his move, but all I heard was silence. I assumed it was a play made by the intruder to make me lower my guard, so I stayed in the bathroom till the cops arrived. When the cops arrived, they searched the apartment before letting me out of the bathroom. I was then asked a couple of questions, and I told them everything they needed to know. But after looking around and carrying out a small investigation, the cops began to doubt my claim as the head officer asked me, "Are you sure you saw someone in here? Because from the look of things, it really seems like no one apart from you was here." Confused, I said, "But I'm sure I saw someone watching me while I was sleeping. He also attempted to attack me." The officer then looked at me and said, "Well, we checked the door and there was no signs of breaking and entering." Baffled at his statement, I didn't know what else to say. As if there weren't any signs of breaking in, I didn't have any proof apart from my word. The officer saw I was having a hard time making sense of things, so he said, "Look, kid, I know you are confused right now, but I heard it's finals week, so maybe the pressures of the exam is getting to you and making you see things. Trust me, college finals can do that to a man." The other officers laughed at his joke, but I didn't. I was still in shock, and I wasn't in the mood to laugh. The cops left after a while, and they told me to be sure that there was someone before I called the next time. The week that followed after that incident was horrible, as I couldn't sleep well and I was jumping at the sound of every little thing. Soon the rumors of the apartment being cursed started to seem true to me, and I eventually couldn't take it anymore. So the next day, I went across the hall and begged my neighbor, older Lady Grace, to tell me why my apartment was the subject of many rumors and if those rumors were true. When we had settled in her apartment, she told me a morbid tale about how, for the past 12 years, all 8 tenants who have lived in my apartment had mysteriously disappeared. She said that back-to-back disappearances had caused quite a stir in the neighborhood, and people started getting anxious. But even with all the tension, it was only the people who lived in my apartment who went missing. She then said the cops had opened up numerous missing persons cases due to the rising number of grieving families, but the bodies of all 8 tenants were never found. She then added that Mr. Terrence, my landlord, was always questioned after every one of his tenants had gone missing, but he always proved he had nothing to do with it, and he always walked free. As she spoke about Mr. Terrence, I noticed she had a bit of anger in her voice, so I asked, "Hey, I know this is a bit forward, Miss Grace, but do you have anything against my landlord, Terrence?" The old woman then looked at me and said, "No, I have no problems with him, but there's something about that man. You're young, so you won't understand, but I can see things, and something isn't right with him." Her words struck me as I left her apartment. I told myself that I really didn't find anything wrong with my landlord, Terrence. Apart from the incessant use of air fresheners, he seemed like a nice man, but even then, I wasn't going to take any chances. That night, I stayed up doing research on the cases, and I found out everything that old Lady Grace said was true. So I made up my mind to move. I started making preparations to move the next day. I managed to get a place to stay as one of my friends allowed me to stay with him until I found another place. To avoid any problems, I decided not to tell Mr. Terrence that I was moving till the next morning when I was ready to leave. I can't really remember, but I'm guessing it was due to the abrupt moving process, as I forgot to put on or spray the air fresheners that morning. I spent the whole day at my friend's house, setting up my things, and after a long day's work, I went back home knowing it'd be the last night I'd spend in the strange apartment. But when I got home, a truly morbid and rancid smell filled my nostrils. It was so bad that I found it hard to breathe. I rushed to open a window or get a can of air fresheners when the words, "So I heard you're moving," made me freeze. I slowly turned around to see who said the sentence, and standing there in the dark was my landlord, Mr. Terrence. Fear filled me as I started to stutter the words. What are you doing here, Mr. Terrence?" Totally ignoring my question, he said, "Why didn't you tell me you were moving? Were you just going to leave?" I then slowly answered him with, "I was going to tell you in the morning, Mr. Terrence." My landlord then looked at me and said, "Why are you leaving? Because of some false rumors that you heard? You'd be a fool to give up this apartment after I basically let you live here for a non-existent price." It was dark, and I couldn't see Mr. Terrence's face, but I could hear the rising anger in his voice, so I said, "You're scaring me now, Mr. Terrence, and I think you need to leave." He ignored my statement again before proceeding to say something that I wasn't expecting. As Terrence looked at me, dead in the eyes, he said in a calm voice, "Do you collect anything, Nathan?" Stunned at the totally irrelevant question, I didn't know what to say. But before I could answer the question, he said, "Well, I do. You see, Nathan, I collect these things called human beings. To be honest, I currently have 8 in my collection, and I'm looking to increase that number to 9 by the end of this night." It took me a while for my mind to register the horrifying statement that my landlord had just made. But before I could react, he lunged at me with his fist in the air. Within seconds, he was in front of me, but I managed to dodge the dangerous punch. His hand went through the drywall, and the wall pieces went flying through the air. Frustrated, he pulled his hand out of the wall, and for a split second, everything clicked as I had a horrible realization about Mr. Terrence's collectibles. It was dark, but there was no mistaking it. Staring right at me was a rotting corpse situated in the wall of my apartment. My mind started unraveling at the ghastly sight, but I didn't stop because I knew if I didn't do something quickly, I would soon join his collection inside the walls. Mr. Terrence was free now, and as he saw my pale face, he said, "I see you've seen where I keep my wonderful collectibles. Don't worry, you'll soon make a fine addition." I rushed for the door, but I wasn't quick enough as he managed to tackle me into a table. The contents of the table spilled over as we fell to the floor struggling. I fought back with all of my strength, but it was hopeless as he was 2 times bigger than me. And it didn't take long before he had his arms wrapped around my neck. I don't know if you've ever been strangled before, but there aren't enough words to describe how painful it is. I couldn't breathe as I felt him put his whole weight down on my neck. I gasped for air as the world around me began to dim. I thrashed and struggled to look for something, anything that I could use to defend myself, and I was about to give up before I felt it. One of my hands thrashing had managed to get a hold of an air freshener can. It must have been one of the cans that fell when we collided into the table. I knew the can wasn't strong enough to knock him out, so I decided to temporarily blind him. With no hesitation, I picked up the can and sprayed it in his eyes. He screamed and reached for his eyes as he finally let go of my neck. I then struck his head with the can before rushing to the door, and as I opened it, I ran into the arms of numerous cops that had just arrived. I would later find out Old Lady Grace had heard the noises from my apartment, so she called the cops. I don't know if it was from the fighting or the fear, but I passed out there, happy that I had survived the cursed apartment. After that incident, numerous things surrounding the apartment were revealed. Mr. Terrence was arrested, and after his apartment was searched and tore down, over 8 badly preserved corpses were found in the walls, and each and every one of them was identified as the bodies of his former tenants. After interrogations, Mr. Terrence also confessed to watching his tenants, potential victims, when they slept. He also went into details about how he got the preserved bodies into the walls, as he said he managed to do it all under the ruse of remodeling the apartment. He then finally confessed to keeping a spare key to the apartment, a key that was unknown to his residents. The families of the victims called for him to be put to death, but he was instead sentenced to life imprisonment. After the whole case had been settled, I moved back to the suburbs with my family. I didn't finish college as I was told I needed time to heal from the traumatizing event. Even after all this time, the therapy still doesn't work, as there's nothing anyone can tell me to make me get over the fact that I slept in a room filled with 8 corpses for over 4 months. But on the bright side, I left the morbid experience with a lesson, as I realized that it's not only people that have stories. Places, too, always have a tale to tell, and those tales should be important to anyone who is deciding to live or stay in those places, because the knowledge of those tales may one day save or end your life. My name is Jacob Summer, and my belief in the supernatural is all but non-existent these days. If I'm being honest, it wasn't always like this. Prior to January 3rd, 2011, I was like most people, completely skeptical and with almost no belief in demons, ghosts, magic, and the things that go bump at night. But best believe, I have no doubts, and I can tell you certainly that there are indeed supernatural beings among us. It all started when I and my wife decided we needed some time away to vacation and spend some quality time together. We had just gotten married earlier that year and decided a getaway trip to celebrate the new year wasn't a bad idea. We both agreed not to travel to a famous city or somewhere we'd get distracted, as we wanted a quiet place where we could enjoy nature and feel close to each other. We eventually settled on a small town called Vik in Iceland. It seemed perfect, as it had a very low population and the landscapes were beautiful. The only problem was finding a hotel we could stay at. I looked around on Google for a while and eventually found a vacation rental. My wife and I were a bit skeptical at first, as we had never actually stayed in a rental home before. But we decided it was a better option than staying in a hotel out of town and booked it. My wife and I celebrated Christmas and New Year's Eve with friends and family before saying goodbye and traveling on the 1st of January 2011. There wasn't a direct flight to Vik, so we had to land in a nearby town called Reykjavik and get a bus to Vik. Finding the bus station wasn't a problem, and the bus driver helped us with our luggage before asking where we were headed. "So where am I taking the lovely couple today?" "A town called Vik," I replied. "Vik is an odd choice for a honeymoon," he said as he started the bus. I laughed and responded with, "Well, it's not our honeymoon. We're just looking to get away." We drove for about 30 minutes before getting to Vik. At first glance, the difference between Vik and Reykjavik wasn't that much, but as we drove deeper in, I couldn't help but feel like this town had a completely eerie feel, like it was apart from the rest of the world. The driver stopped at the station before saying, "We're here." We were the only ones in the bus, so I figured he wouldn't mind taking us to the rental instead of the station. "Hey man, we really don't know how we're going to get there, so could you take us to our rental?" I continued with, "That is, if you won't mind, of course." He replied with, "Sure. Which one is it?" I took out my phone and pulled up the photo before showing it to him. His facial expressions immediately changed, and I could tell he had no intention of taking me there. He didn't say anything for a while, then eventually took out his phone and called someone. They spoke in Icelandic, so I had no clue what they were saying, but I could tell it wasn't a pleasant conversation. We waited for about 5 minutes and another car came. The driver still hadn't said anything. He simply transferred our luggage into the next car, told us to get off, and left. The new driver didn't know any English, but we figured he'd be taking us to our rental, so we got in. My wife had been awfully quiet since we landed, so I asked, "Hey babe, are you okay?" She didn't respond. "Babe?" I said, getting her attention. She then replied, "Yeah, I'm fine. I just don't feel so good." We eventually arrived at the house, and the first thing I noticed was it was much bigger in person. For the price we got it at, I had expected something much smaller, but I wasn't complaining. The driver stopped the car, and I removed our luggage. I figured I was supposed to pay him, but wasn't sure as he had been completely still since we arrived, simply staring at nothing. When I was done, I decided to pay and let him know he could leave. "All done, sir. How much do I owe you?" The driver still didn't move, and I decided to check if he was okay. But as I reached out to tap him, he immediately grabbed my hand, looking me straight in the eyes. The situation was extremely creepy, as his grip was painfully tight, and the look in his eyes was frightening. I didn't know if I had done something wrong, but before I could say anything, he simply said, "Bölvivit," and then let me go. I wasn't sure if I still had to pay him, but he started his car and left. The feeling I got from looking into his eyes wasn't a good one. The whole atmosphere felt different. I stood there thinking about it for a while before my wife eventually said, "Hey, I've been waiting for you. Are you going to stand there all day?" I laughed and said, "I'll be right there." But before going in, I decided to find out what it was the driver said, so I took out Google Translate and repeated what he said the best I could. My heart sank as I realized what the word meant. Cursed. The first night at the rental was seemingly perfect, but little did I know that things were about to change the very next day. The next morning, first thing I noticed was that April had moved from our bed last night to another room in the house. I asked her about it casually, but she said she thought I had carried her to the other room and wasn't very happy about that. I decided it was better to let her believe this, as telling her any different may frighten her and ruin the vacation. I also noticed strange little things happening in the house that day. For starters, after taking a shower, I realized I had massive scratches on my chest and back. I could have sworn I didn't have them when I woke up, but I simply applied a cream and went to spend time with April. The next strange thing happened later on in the day. April had gone out to take some pictures for her Instagram not too far from the house, and I was using the time to catch up on some business. But then, no matter how crazy this sounds, I could have sworn I saw her walk right in front of me. At first, I thought it was April playing a game of some kind, so I put down my laptop and got up to follow. But before I could go upstairs, April walked through the front door. I was obviously confused, as I knew for a fact I had just seen someone walk past me. April didn't seem to be playing a prank, and I was beginning to bother about the situation but didn't want to worry her, as she looked like she was finally enjoying herself. I assumed I was probably just seeing things and needed rest. Later that night, about 10 p.m., April and I decided to call it a day and go to bed. Before going to bed, she looked at me and said, "Babe, is everything all right? You've been acting kind of strange." I admit, I had been a bit paranoid about all the incidents since the driver's vague message, but I still had no intention of worrying her, so I responded with, "No, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong." She looked at me almost like she could tell I was lying. "I just want you to be okay." I gave her a smile and kiss before falling asleep. At around midnight, I woke up to a very odd feeling. April was grabbing my foot and pulling at it. Now, I didn't understand why she was doing this so early in the morning, but I wasn't up for it, so I simply said, "April, it's too early. Come back to bed," and tried to go back to sleep. About 5 minutes later, April tugged at my foot again, and I simply pulled my leg back inside. 5 minutes later, I felt a hand on my foot. I tried pulling it away, but it gripped so tight, it felt like I would break a bone. I opened my eyes and was immediately flung from the bed. It was only then I realized April wasn't on our bed anymore. Whatever it was that pulled me off my bed was probably also responsible for the scratches and strange things happening in the house. Now, as you can imagine, at this point, I was completely creeped out and decided to call for help. I immediately Googled the emergency number for Iceland and dialed. "Hello, please? I need help. There's someone in my house," I said. "Yes, and what's your address?" she replied. I gave the address, but what followed was silence. Then she eventually said, "Sir, I would recommend you leave the house immediately. Help is on the way, but please leave the house." I was about to inform them of my wife being missing when someone walked by my room door. I immediately dropped the phone and followed. Finally, examining what I was following, I understood why I mistook it for April earlier, as its physique was very similar to that of a woman. She was dressed in all black without any shoes on, and with every step it took, it looked like she wet the ground. I followed her all the way downstairs and couldn't help but wonder if she knew I was following, but chose to ignore me. She walked into a room and I followed, but when I stepped in, she was gone. I turned around to walk back out and immediately felt a hand grip my neck. There was nothing human about this creature. Its face was pale blue and its eyes were almost completely dark. It had marks around its neck and was missing parts of its hair, but the weirdest thing about it was that it was drenched. I tried hitting its hand to free myself, but its grip only tightened around my neck. At this point, I could barely breathe and I could feel myself losing consciousness. That's when I heard the door being forced open. I passed out and hit the floor. I woke up in an ambulance a couple of minutes later. There were a few paramedics and police officers around me. "April!" I screamed as I looked around for her. The officers informed me that there was no one in the house, and despite my best efforts, recommended I stay away from the house that night. I eventually visited the house with officers the following day. But even then, I couldn't find my wife or anything that could help. When giving my statement, the officer didn't seem shocked in the slightest. I found that pretty bizarre, seeing as I was describing a demon to him. After some time on the case, I met with their chief, and he informed me that Vic wasn't that big a town, and if they hadn't found her by now, it wasn't a good sign.
There's a story among the people of Vic regarding the house you were staying in, sir. They say a few years back there was a couple who lived in that same house. The story has different versions, but what most people believe is that the husband was very abusive to the wife and eventually killed her and drowned her body in the lake. He continued. The husband denied all the allegations and said the wife had been cheating and must have run off with her lover. Her family did not believe the story, but there was no evidence, so the case was closed quickly. Some believe her family called to the old gods because just a few days later, the husband was strangled to death in the apartment.
Normally, I'd disregard the story as bullshit immediately. But after what I'd seen, I very much believed it. What does that have to do with my wife and I asked. The officer responded with,
Well, most believe the soul of the woman still haunts the house after that. Whenever people move in, someone ends up dying, and it's always the husband. They say, in the eyes of the spirit, all men are evil, and this is justice.
He continued.
So the house was bought and turned into a rental, although no one even went close to it until now. But I'm very sorry to hear about your wife, and I want you to know we'll do everything to find her.
The cops didn't have any answers for why my wife disappeared, as it was the first time it was happening. My family came over to stay with me, as I had decided to stay for the following weeks until April was found. It's been 12 years now, and I haven't heard anything from or about my wife. The first years were horrible, and I spent countless days searching, but I found nothing. I can't help but wonder if the demon took my wife because she couldn't kill me. Maybe it was my fault for taking her there. Things are slowly getting better though, and I have fewer and fewer nightmares about the demon. But I will never give up on my wife, and best believe I will never forget the days I spent in a haunted house. Hi, I'm Detective Arthur Field, and you may have heard me narrate the story about how I almost got killed by a psycho serial killer. And if you like that story, you will love the one that I am about to tell you. Now, as you know, I'm a detective. But before becoming a detective, I was a normal cop, which meant instead of investigating homicides, I did all the normal cop duties, like patrolling, attending 911 emergency calls, etc. This is an incident that happened to me when I was at my new job. I was young and eager to prove myself. Whenever any senior cop needed a hand, I was always there to help. As I was young and so full of energy, I did not mind taking the night shift. I was working in a small town anyway, so nothing much happened at night anyways. The most important part of the night shift was patrolling the town. We had an 8 p.m. shift and the next was a 2 a.m. shift. Me and some other cops drove around the town making sure everything was all right. When I first started patrolling at night, some of the senior cops told me that there were several abandoned houses in town. Often, teenage kids partied in these houses or homeless people took shelter in them. In both scenarios, I was instructed to ask the occupants to leave the house. However, in my months of patrolling, there was one particular house on the outskirts of our town that no one ever went into. The whole town used to call it the haunted house. I drove by it every night, but nothing weird or paranormal ever happened there. I just ignored the abandoned house and went on my way. Until one morning around 3 a.m. I was just about to finish my round when I saw the front door of that house open. Considering the fact that it was old and falling apart, the door must have opened due to wind or raccoon. I decided to step out of my car, but first let the operator know that I was approaching the house to close its front door. As soon as I climbed the porch, I heard a giggle coming from upstairs. It sounded like a few toddlers were playing and laughing upstairs. This creeped me out, and all the weird story the townspeople had told me about this house came crashing back. But I was a cop, and it was my job to make sure the house was clear. So instead of just shutting the door and leaving, I grabbed my pocket flashlight, drew my gun, and started checking out the bottom floor. Hello, it's the police. Anyone in here? The giggling got louder as I checked each room one by one and finally approached the staircase that led to the top floor. Anyone up there, please make yourself known. It's the police, I announced once again. The giggling continued, but now I could hear the footsteps of 2 or maybe 3 little kids running. Their little feet carried them from one room to another. I was scared shitless, but I had a duty to complete. And unless I do make sure with my own eyes that the house is empty, I wasn't going to leave. As I stepped onto the top floor, everything became pin-drop silent, as if nothing at all had happened here a few moments ago. My hands were shaking, and I was silently saying a prayer as I checked the top floor. There were 3 rooms and a bathroom upstairs, and each and every room was empty. No intact furniture in any of the rooms, which meant no place for hiding. As soon as I made sure there were no kids there, I just left the house. I got in my car and drove off. I told all the cops what happened, but no one took me seriously. The next day, the house looked fine, with no open doors or giggling kids. The other cops and some townspeople loved to give me shit about that incident. One amongst them was Miss Tucker. She often visited the station as her husband was the sheriff. She was in her 40s, enjoyed calling me names like Pussy Car and Scared Cow after the haunted house incident. Luckily for me, I got transferred to another town soon after that. My career kept on excelling until I became a detective. However, I never got the answer to what was going on in the haunted house until recently. One of my former colleagues, a fellow cop who used to work with me in that station, reached out to me a few days ago. Detective Field, it's Officer Rogers. How have you been? Rogers! So nice to hear from you after so long. I'm doing great, solving cases. What about you? Why did you call me after so long? Remember the haunted house? The one you had to patrol past every night? Yeah, how can I forget it? That was the first and the last time I was so scared on duty. What about it? Did you hear about what happened there? No, I haven't. Never looked into it once I left the town, to be honest. Well, do you remember Miss Tucker, the sheriff's wife? The nosy one? Yeah, sure I do. Can't forget her as well. So, the night when you heard the kids giggling and running, it wasn't your mind playing tricks on you, or a ghost. There were kids up there. Wait, what? Are you serious? Because I checked all the rooms and they were empty. There was no one there. How is this even possible? Calm down, Field. Let me explain. So do you remember there were reports of 3 toddlers missing from our town a few days before you entered the haunted house? Yeah, man, I remember each case I have worked on. I remember scouting the entire sugarcane field looking for those kids. Those kids were hidden in that house. Rogers, I do not get what you are trying to say. I just have more and more questions. I know that, Arthur. So, the kids were kidnapped and hidden in the house. However, the toddlers did not know they were kidnapped. They thought it was all a game. They trusted their kidnapper as the face was familiar to them. You know how kids can be. Okay, so that explains why they were hiding from me. The kidnapper did not want me to find them, so he must have asked the kids to hide in some secret hiding spot that I couldn't find. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Just instead of the kidnapper being a man, it was a woman. Who was she? Who could abduct kids from their own town? Miss Tucker. She used to babysit all those 3 kids, so the kids trusted her completely. Man, that's horrible. But why did she take them? Last year, they started a new project in town to demolish all those abandoned houses. She was opposed to it, but the mayor approved it anyways. When they tore down the haunted house, they found 3 skeletons in there. 3 kid-sized skeletons. A big investigation was launched, and it did not take much time for the detective to connect the skeletons to the missing kids case. Unfortunately for Miss Tucker, some evidence found in the house pointed toward her. They took her in for questioning, and she cracked under pressure, confessed to her crimes, and is now behind bars serving life. She took the kids to perform some sacrificial ritual in that house so she could have kids too. Everything was so unfortunate to watch. Just wanted you to know that you were right all along, and if we had investigated a bit more, we could have saved the kids. Bye. Talk to you soon. Yeah, man. Thanks for letting me know. I hung up the phone and just sat there at my desk thinking. What do you think? Was it my fault that those kids died? Should I have been a bit more brave?
It has been many months since we left. After weeks of torture and fright, we finally decided enough was enough. We packed up our things and left. Most wouldn't understand or even begin to comprehend why a young couple lacking in any kind of wealth would choose to move out of any kind of previous accommodation. But they didn't know the truth that lies within that wretched place. It all began right on the first week of us moving in. We had just finished our degrees at university, and we were searching for somewhere close by where our new jobs were to call home. It didn't take long before we came across a house far under the normal market price, so without thinking, we bought it without even looking around. The owners were already gone by the time we had arrived, so we got straight onto moving our furniture in. Without much to our name, as of yet, we moved everything in within just 2 days, and on the third, we can now call it home. We were so excited to finally have a home, and that night we went to bed brimming with excitement and energy. That's when I started seeing it. That very same night, I had woken up in what seemed to be the middle of the night. It was pitch black outside, and it wasn't that state of waking up where you can simply get up, go to the toilet, maybe just roll over to find a better sleeping position. No, this was something different. My entire body still seemed to be sleeping, and even though my eyes were fully open, I couldn't even move my face. Although I was mildly shocked by this lack of movement, I didn't necessarily feel terrified or scared. That was until I felt something watching me. Suddenly, I felt extremely uneasy, and I tried to call out to Jack, my boyfriend, but my lips stayed shut. Without much point in trying to get up or wake Jack, I managed to close my eyes, and with everything I had, drifted back to sleep. The next morning, we both still felt that rush of excitement from all the moving in, and we just sat up in bed to read for a while before breakfast. As I reached for my book, which was usually located on my bedside table directly next to me, I was surprised to see it had fallen to the floor. I could barely remember the night before, as if it were a dream, so perhaps I knocked it over in my sleep, I thought, while I picked it up from the floor. After about 20 minutes, we both felt our stomachs roaring to be fed, so we got out of bed, popped our slippers on, and headed down the stairs to the kitchen. The kitchen was mostly colored white and black, an attempt at a modern style, but the walls bore cracks and the cupboards all bent slightly off their hinges, clinging to the bearings to stay upright. Over at the sink, several patches of rust and dark stains engulfed the once gleaming metal. As disgusting as it was practically the same filth we were previously living in at our shared dorm rooms, so we didn't care and went to grab some cereal. The rest of the day felt normal after that. We finished breakfast, went to our jobs, came back, and got ready for dinner. Instantaneously, we noticed that rusty, stained sink was now completely spotless. Looking at each other with strained eyebrows, confused by its sudden cleanliness, we nervously walked over to continue washing our hands. The water rumbled in the pipes as it struggled to make its way to our waiting hands. By the time it burst out, we jolted back to see the water was brown and seemed to contain specks of muck and filth within it. Jack hastily turned the tap off and pulled the plug, hoping to drain the sewage-like liquid. As it sunk into the drain, we stared at each other, mouths wide open in disgust. Later that evening, other strange occurrences started happening around the house too. Objects were falling off the shelves regardless of the fact that all the windows were closed, so no gust of wind or drafts could be flowing through the house. The excitement still held on. We were still living in a house, bought below market price, and we could hire a plumber to deal with that rotten pipework connected to the sink. We laid there in bed, staring at the ceiling, preparing ourselves for slumber after a long day of work. After a while, I could start to hear Jack's mumbled snoring, which I giggled at before falling asleep myself.
Hungry.
My eyelids split open after hearing a raspy voice whispering hungry almost straight into my ear. Horrified by this unnatural noise, I tried to sit up and look around, but my body was once again motionless. This time, however, my head was positioned toward the corner of the room. As my eyes returned back to focus, I spotted a mortifying figure huddled over in the corner, back to the wall, facing me, grinning. I froze in fear. My body started shaking uncontrollably from the horror of what lay before me, but I still had no control over it to escape or warn Jack. Even trying to scream wouldn't work. All that came out was a hushed murmur as that thing kept grinning at me. I couldn't make out its face either. Its dark form meant only the very highlights of its foul jaws could be seen in the darkness. I was petrified. Hours later, still staring into that grinning nightmare, the sun had finally begun to rise, and my eyes were able to rest, even just for a few hours. In the morning, I looked over to see Jack, still asleep, drooling onto his pillow. A faint smile spread across my face before I remembered the night before, exactly like last time. It felt like a dream, a state of total futility and dreadful fear. I shook Jack awake and blurted out everything I could remember, drenching the sheets with tears. I couldn't have been more scared. He took it more or less seriously enough and told me,
"Don't worry, I'll stay awake tonight, okay? Then if that thing comes again, I'll deal with it. Sound good?"
I nodded slightly, still dripping from the tears, and we once again got up to go downstairs for breakfast. As we walked into the kitchen that morning, I stopped in the doorway as I saw the book that should have been on my bedside table, which was now perched on top of the dining table. Not only was my book now moving on its own in the night, but that also wasn't all either. That sink we saw yesterday evening, which was spotless, well, it was covered in rust and dark stains again. Terror was beginning to set in. We decided it was time to do something about what was going on around the house. So, for the rest of the day, we prepared a camera directly at the sink and bought several cans of coffee so Jack would be able to stay awake that night. The smell of caffeine engulfed my nostrils as we headed back inside after returning from the shops. I longed for it, but we knew I needed to sleep to get through this. All that remained now was to wait for night to fall and that thing to return. We sat in bed for the next few hours and talked while Jack comforted me. He told me it would be alright, but as soon as we saw the sun dip below the horizon and the moon rise into the sky, we knew it was time. We climbed under the duvet, ready for the night ahead. At least that was what we thought. The hours clocked by one, and soon enough, I had fallen into a deep sleep. Jack sat awake, sipping coffee, and kept looking out the corner that I had told him about the previous night. For hours, the house laid still and silent, almost cautious to not disturb my slumber. Then, all of a sudden, it started.
Hungry.
Just as I had done the previous 2 nights, my eyes shot open. Everything was completely void of all light. That was aside from one particularly visible patch of light on the ceiling. As my pupils darted around the room, I strained to tell Jack that it was happening. I needed him. A vast wave of relief washed over me as I felt him moving about on the other side of the bed. I was safe. Just then noticed something in the corner of the ceiling where that dim patch of light sat. There, latched onto the ceiling, was a figure of no human form, grinning down at me, its teeth sharp and twisted. The utter terror and fear gripped me and forced me into shock. My body immediately started violently shaking. My mouth foamed all while I had to lay there and watch as the figure crept towards me. On its way, it knocked over my book that I had once again put on the bedside table to read in the morning. I took my eyes off of it for just that second and it had vanished. A stroke of luck, it would seem. The noise of the book colliding with the floor also had alerted Jack next to me. I felt him crawl over and lean next to my face. It confused me a bit, until I heard it whisper, There, grinning staring at me was that awful figure observing me in my struggle with such sadistic joy that my seizure stopped. And then I felt it. I burst out of bed as soon as I woke up. Jack had seen me having a seizure during the night and tried waking me up. It did nothing for a while, but eventually I came to. We dialed for an ambulance that came just minutes later. I was completely pale and barely able to walk when it arrived, and the paramedics said I was still massively in shock, and I needed to rest before they could check me over for injuries or diagnose what had happened to me. A few hours later at the hospital, after I had finally calmed down, Jack came in with several doctors who were ready to run tests on me and have me looked at. The results were returned quickly and showed I had been in a state called sleep paralysis, which was also the reason for the seizure, which was due to the shock of the things I could see while stuck in that paralyzed state. The results seemed acceptable, but when I asked why I could hear it talking, their faces dropped. They told me under strained breath that it was extremely rare for there to be any speech while in sleep paralysis, regardless of who it was from. I sat there and contemplated this. Then I told them it had been knocking over my book. Disbelief fell upon all their faces, and they decided to check me for any psychological problems, but none were found. They discussed it for a while, but simply couldn't come to any final conclusion, and so told me to take some antidepressants, and that was that. On the way home, me and Jack sat there, bewildered by the lack of acknowledgement of what had happened just last night. When we arrived home, we decided to check the camera that had been watching the sink, but we found out that it had run out of battery before the night even started. Jack said it was fully charged when he set it up. Peculiar as it was, we left it. Even to this day, even in this new house, even in this new bed, that figure still haunts my every waking moment. The day we moved felt ominous, as if the thing was following us, but only distant memories held it in my mind. But one day, that thing will return, and God bless those who chooses it as its next victim.
Hi guys, my name is Jasper, and I'm a writer. And being a writer means I am constantly in search of inspiration to write great stories about. This time, I am planning to write a book about all the famous urban legends from all over the world. While doing my research, I came across an urban legend of the witches. This legend can be found in many countries worldwide, be it Norway, India, America, Japan, or Mexico. But one story in particular caught my attention. This story takes place on a dark, scary night in a rural area in India. The story starts with a man named Ali who was traveling due to his job. Ali loved his job. But if there was one more thing he loved more, that was photography. Whenever he went on an overnight trip, he made sure to carry his camera with him. Ali was very good at photography, and many of his pictures were displayed in exhibitions. Some were even published in esteemed magazines and newspapers. On one such weekend, Ali, who lived and worked in Mumbai, had to travel to Kerala, a state in southwest India, for some work related to his job. Ali was delighted to visit the state he hadn't visited before. So as soon as he was asked by his boss to leave, Ali took the night flight to Kerala. As he was done with his work, he decided to explore the surrounding areas and perhaps see some famous tourist spots in the vicinity. He asked the local people about the places he could explore, and most of them told him about a beautiful large waterfall that was no more than 20 kilometers away from the city he was in. The next morning, Ali took a local bus and visited the waterfall. He planned to get back to the town by evening so he could catch his night flight back to Mumbai. He reached the waterfall and the place was crowded. So many tourists had gathered to see the iconic waterfall that Ali could barely get any decent pictures. Defeated, he decided to return to the small bus stop and wait for a bus back to the town. After waiting for about an hour or so, Ali wasn't able to catch even one bus. He was tired and bored out of his mind and wanted to pee. Without thinking much about it, he stood beneath a nearby tree, hung his bag to a long nail that was sticking out of the tree, and relieved himself. He took his bag, but while taking it off the nail, he removed the nail from the tree by mistake. Not paying much attention, he dropped the nail on the ground and returned to the bus stop. Not 5 minutes later, a car stopped right in front of Ali, and the driver said, "What are you doing here, sir?" "I am stranded on this road, I believe. There is no bus going to the town, and I need to reach the town before evening. I have been waiting here for an hour." "Get in the car. I am going to the town. I can drop you off." Ali was thrilled, and without any hesitation, he got in the car. It was around afternoon now. "Thank you so much, sir, for offering me a ride. I am Ali, by the way." "Oh, no problem. I'm Victor D'Souza, and you would have not gotten a bus today anyways." "Why, sir?" asked Ali. "There is a bus strike going on in town, so the local bus service is unavailable at the moment." "Oh, that explains why I could not get a bus." "Also, Ali, what brings you here?" Ali was delighted to answer the question. "I work for an IT company, and work takes me all over the country. This time, I landed in Kerala and decided to do some sightseeing after work. I love photography. But this time, unfortunately, the waterfall was crowded and I couldn't get a good shot." If you have time, can I show you an offbeat spot that has a waterfall too? You can click your pictures there." "Sure," said Ali. Victor and Ali spoke about general topics during their drive when suddenly, Victor asked Ali, "Do you mind telling me what you are doing near the tree beside the bus stop where I picked you up from?" They were 2 hours into the drive now, and the sun had begun to set already. "Oh," Ali laughed sheepishly and said, "Well, I was relieving myself." You must not be aware, but any resident would not have dared go near the bus stop, let alone the tree." "Why?" "It's believed that a witch used to live on the tree many, many years ago." Ali laughed out loud. "Come on, Victor. We live in the 21st century. Do not tell me about a stupid urban legend." "You may think it's funny, but 6 people died in the village in the most horrible way. All of those people had gone near the tree. It's a pretty isolated area. It could have been an animal attack. 6 people dying after visiting the same place does not seem like a coincidence. Everyone believes that it was the witch's doing. After the incident, a very learned priest was called by the villagers to put an end to the witch. But he wasn't able to banish the evil spirit from this world. Instead, he managed to capture the witch in the tree and shut off her from the world with the help of a long nail." "Yeah, then I guess I freed the witch," Ali said, still amused. It was rapidly getting dark now. "What do you mean, Ali?" Victor asked, a little bit panicked. "While I was peeing, I hung my bag on the nail and it fell when I took my bag off. I let it be on the ground and that's when you drove there." "My God, Ali, I don't know what will happen now. It's better if we reach the town soon." "Hey, watch out!" screamed Ali. Victor steered the car off the road and got out of it. "Hey, are you nuts? Why did you stand in the middle of the street like this? I could have driven over you." Ali could hear Victor screaming at the woman who had stood in the middle of the road, but could not hear what the woman said to Victor. Soon, the two returned to the car, and the woman, who was dressed in white, sat in the back seat. "She too wants to go to the town, but just like you, she can't due to the bus strike," said Victor. Ali turned to the woman, who was stunningly beautiful, and introduced himself. "Hey, I'm Ali." "I'm Mira," said the lady. Their conversation steered back to the topic of the witch and how Ali had possibly freed the witch. This is when Mira spoke. "I do not think the witch can change her form." Before Ali could ask anything else, Victor informed him that the spot they spoke earlier about was just a few minutes away, and although it was dark outside now, he could at least see the spot. Ali agreed, and the three reached the said spot. Victor parked the car and told Mira to wait inside, as they both will return shortly. Victor led Ali towards the spot, which was in the woods. "Hey, there is your waterfall." Victor pointed in the distance. "Go ahead and smoke, and I will smoke a cigarette here." "Okay," said Ali and walked ahead with his camera, which could click pictures in the dark as well. That's when Victor got a message on his cell phone. And what the message read sucked the living soul out of Victor. He could see Ali in the distance, busy with his camera. And from behind, he heard anklets, meaning a woman was walking towards him. A few minutes later, a feminine hand landed on his shoulder, and he knew what to expect. It was Mira. She said, "The police came looking for the driver of the car, so I decided to fetch you. They said they found a dead body a few kilometers away." That's when Victor showed the message to Mira, and she too looked equally terrified. Meanwhile, Ali turned with his camera hanging off his neck, and a creepy smile on his face spoke.
Yes, she does change forms.
A few hours later, the police found the mutilated bodies of Victor and Mira near the waterfall. And on Victor's phone was the message that had the picture of the dead body, who was none other than the real Ali.
Hello. I woke up yesterday. I know you feel strange when I tell you that, but after hearing my story, you won't be confused. It is me, Willie, and I'm going to tell you my real experience. So, I woke up at 3 a.m. I felt something strange. I heard some weird noises coming from the walls. I thought there must be rats between the spaces. I shouted at them, "You bloody rats! You won't let anyone sleep! Stop!" After I said this, it stopped, and within a minute, the scratching noises intensified. It seemed like I made the rats angry. I shouted again in anger, "What the hell?" And I punched the wall. Then the scratches stopped. I said, "Wow, so weird. Could my words change anything here? Can you hear me?" I was asking this from the rats, but then again scratching started with more intensity. It pissed me off. At around 3:30, I heard some sounds from our kitchen. I could tell then that someone turned the kitchen light on and sat on the chair as I heard the sound of the chair moving. I got up and moved through the hallway, but when I stopped there, I saw nothing. The light was off and no one was there. I turned back and went to my room and felt immediate shock. I heard glass breaking in the kitchen. It was terrifying. I hastened frantically and grabbed my torch and a pistol. I slowly walked into the kitchen and I almost screamed in pain. I stepped on a piece of glass that went partially through my foot. It hurt so much, but I kept myself silent, with my eyes tearing and blurring my vision. My heart rate was increasing. But this question pondered me. Where did these pieces of glass come from? Who broke the glass? The more I thought, the more I got scared. I ran to my room and locked it. Then I heard the scratching noise on my room's door. I held my gun and hid beside the closet. The light was off. I heard the sound of my door opening, but I immediately shot at the darkness. I checked in the darkness and I discovered that when I shot in the darkness, I shot my cat, my pet. I felt so shocked I fell to my knees. Tears welled in my eyes. I moved and sat on my bed. My room's door was open and I was continuously staring at the corpse. Suddenly, the kitchen light turned on. My father walked to the washroom, but what I saw was my father didn't even notice the corpse of my cat. But then a weird thing happened. My father was about to step on the cat's body when his foot went through the body as if either the cat's body or my father was a ghost. Then I heard something fall in the kitchen. I stood up from the bed, and father came out of the bathroom. He asked, "I hear something break. What happened?" I said, "I saw you stepping through my cat's body." He was shocked. "Where is it?" I pointed there and saw nothing. It vanished. Then I told him, I couldn't sleep since 3 a.m. First, I heard scratching noises from the walls. Then I heard noises in the kitchen. Then I stepped on a piece of glass, hurting my foot. I showed him my foot. Then I became alert and I pointed the gun into the darkness and a body. It looked like my cat. But when you came, you stepped through the body. But now, the corpse is no more. He said, "There wasn't a body here when I came. Are you sure you didn't take any drugs?" I became scared and I said, "Drug? What drug?" I started to get scared pretty badly and I started to hear my heartbeat right in my head.
Relax, boy. You look sick. Go back to sleep. Sit here. I'm returning with a glass of water.
And after saying these words, he was going to the kitchen. The kitchen light turned off, then on again, off, and father disappeared through the darkness. Dad! Dad, where are you? I felt that a shadow was coming to me from the darkness. I held my gun and shot twice. I went to the kitchen and turned the light on. It shook me. I saw my father lying dead on the floor, with blood on the walls. I shot him. Then I saw a shadow-like creature on the wall. It had red eyes. It was crawling on the walls. Then my mother came to me and she screamed.
What have you done, Willie? You killed your father!
I saw the shadow was now standing behind my mother and staring at me. It entered my mom's body. I ran to get out of the house, but there was no door, no window. I was trapped in the walls. The more I looked at my mom, the faster my heart got. In a second, the creature leaped at me and it hit me in the eye. Then the creature fled. Then I saw the exit door. I tried to reach for it. Then the creature came from the back, and in a fraction of a second, I saw my eyes torn out of their sockets. In an instant, I was in pain and screaming badly. God, get off! Let me go! Leave! And then, my parents began to ask me questions.
Hey, Willie, wake up, son.
Son, get up. What happened in your dream?
Then I opened my eyes. Something very wrong. It was horrible, Dad. I killed you. And the last thing I remember was my eyes being torn out of their sockets before fading out.
Calm down. Relax.
Relax. Mom, my heart is beating fast. Please check my heart rate.
Yeah, sure.
The device showed 125. The letters 125 were carved on the wall in red color. And I fell there and woke up after a year. I woke up yesterday, and today I'm telling you everything that happened at midnight. Hi, I'm Cameron, and a psychic. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not some weirdo who can tell your future or something, but instead, I feel things, and I see things that a normal person wouldn't be able to see or sense. My close friends and family know about this, and they sometimes tease me about it too. But the truth is, it's no joke. A few years ago, one of my best friends, Grant, got a new job. We have a small group of 7 friends back from our college, and we often get together or celebrate when something good happens. And Grant getting a great job sure called for some celebration. However, his job was in a neighboring town, so he also rented an apartment in a 2-story building in a town near his office. We all decided to throw Grant a housewarming/congratulatory party. Grant had moved into his house not more than 2 weeks ago, and some friends from our group had helped him move in. Everything was going great for Grant, and it seemed like he was living his dream life. Before going to the party, I had a phone call with Grant, and during our conversation, he was boasting about how cheap the rent of his apartment was, even though it was in a prime location. Although Grant was too happy about it, I smelled something fishy in the situation. My doubt was cleared when I visited the place. It was an elegant 2-bedroom apartment with 2 bathrooms, an open kitchen, and a huge balcony attached to the living room. The moment I stepped into the place, I felt weighed down and choked, as if this massive weight was placed on top of my shoulders. Being a psychic, I pick up on the vibe of any place faster than the average people, and I felt like something was wrong with the place itself. But I'm pretty good at acting as if everything was normal, so that's what I did. I tried to enjoy the party and shrug off the heavy feeling as much as I could. Sometime after midnight, most of the guests had left, and it was just the 7 of us in Grant's apartment. Everyone except me and 2 of my other friends had a little too much to drink at this point. We were all sitting in the living room when the subject of our conversation turned to an incident that had happened with Rick, who was helping Grant move in. Rick began to describe his experience. Yo guys, you won't believe this, but when I was helping Grant to move in, I was carrying a few boxes from the car up to his bedroom. While I was in his bedroom setting the boxes down, I felt like someone was watching me. I was spooked the first time, but I brushed it off and continued to work. But I knew for sure that Grant and Jafar were downstairs unloading the sofa from my pickup truck, so I wasn't sure who was watching me. The next time I come up with some more boxes, I have the same feeling of being watched, so I put down the boxes and searched the entire house. But except for me, there was no one there. I know this sounds childish, but bro, it was weird as all hell, man. Are you kidding me? Hey, I felt the same way when I came up to drop off his computer, and you and Grant were downstairs carrying the boxes. I didn't tell anyone because everyone would make fun of me, but now that you've mentioned it, I think it's true, man. Jafar confirmed Rick's claims. Although at this point I knew both of them weren't making things up, I didn't say anything in order to not spook my friends. At the time, I felt as if the weight on my shoulders increased and I felt suffocated in the apartment. Hey guys, I need some fresh air. I'll be out on the balcony for a while. Saying that, I left and stood on the balcony. All my friends were having a chat back inside. That's when Rick came up to me. Hey man, I know we make fun of you and all, but be honest with me. You feel something in this place too, right? He asked. Yeah, man. Since I stepped into the place, there's this heaviness around me. The air is suffocating, and I think there is something in this place that is unusual. I wanted to be honest with my friend. Do you think we should warn Grant about it? Rick asked me. I think it's good if we keep him out of the situation. He needs this job and this place. I asked Rick to keep quiet. After around 1 a.m, we all leave Grant's apartment to go back home. I'm the last one leaving, as it fell upon me to make sure all the drunk and tipsy friends made it into their respective Ubers. I then looked up to see Grant waving at me from his balcony. I looked at him and waved back with a mischievous smile on my face and drove back home. A second later, I got a text from Grant asking me to text him back when I got home. I texted him as soon as I arrived at my house. The next day, I called Grant to tell him that the party was amazing and that I had a great time. Hey Grant, thanks for inviting me, man. I enjoyed spending time with you and the guys. Thanks for coming, man. By the way, I didn't ask you earlier, but who was the girl with you last night? Girl? What are you talking about? You know that all the guests left before you guys, right? So how would a girl be there in my apartment? Grant questioned me. Hey, are you sure? I asked him, just to confirm. Yeah, I'm sure, Cameron. And if I had a girl over, I know I'd tell you of all people. So now explain what you mean by a girl was there in my apartment. Last night, when I waved at you and sat in my car, there was a woman around 25 years old standing behind you. I thought you had a girl over, so I didn't ask you about it then. But now that you're mentioning there was no girl, I want to tell you one more thing. I know you don't believe in psychics and all, but you know my intuitions are strong and most of the time correct. Last night when I visited your apartment, I felt like there was a presence other than us there, and you know it was experienced by Rick and Jafar too. So it suggests you find another place to live in. Listening to me, Grant was in shock, and soon he decided to move into a new apartment. In my life as a psychic, I'd always sensed things, but this was my first time I had seen a spirit with my own eyes. By God's grace, no one was harmed, but I could never let my friend live in such a house. The thought of what could have gone wrong if Grant had stayed there haunts me, even now.
Have you ever been to Horton's? Although it is quite well known here, in the rest of the world, there are very few franchises. And in fact, no one talks about them as much as you might think. I'm a big Horton's fan. There is nothing nicer than the smell of good coffee in the morning. But as you can imagine, this is not a story about how much I love coffee. This is a story of the worst day of my life, and yet I am thankful for it, because by a miracle, it was not the last. It all started when I turned 18. Right out of high school, I needed a part-time job to pay for college, and Horton's was my first choice. The people at the cafeteria already knew me. I was always going with my father, and I lived a few blocks away, so they hired me almost without hesitation. My first few months were very good. Everyone told me I was too dedicated for a simple coffee shop, but what was wrong with that? I enjoyed it. Everything was going great until one Tuesday in winter. I remember it was a cold, rainy morning. Our place was a bit small, so there were very few people attending it, especially in the morning. We had no security personnel, but we could call the police if something happened. But the place was very quiet, generally. That Tuesday, it was very quiet. There were very few people in the place. One man stood out among them. He was very tall and muscular, but for some reason, he looked absolutely terrified. He was looking everywhere without stopping, and he was already on his third cup of coffee. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but I didn't want to be too intrusive. Anyway, the answer came on its own. Some men entered the place. 2 of them were in suits and were very tall, even taller than the one sitting at the table. Behind them was another man with a cigar, much fatter and shorter than the rest, but nevertheless, he was the most terrifying of them all. The other men looked quiet, but the shortest one, who looked like the boss, had all the appearance of a mobster. As soon as they walked in, I was cleaning up near them and said hello. But not only did they ignore me, but I could see how the boss made a face at one of them in the suit, mocking me, and he chuckled under his breath. The men walked straight over to where the muscular man sat, and as one of the men in the suit grabbed him by the shirt, the boss said something I couldn't hear. In response to this, the muscular man started to cry, but the only thing he managed to do was to get the boss to throw the boiling coffee in his face. The man fell to the floor and began to scream, and the few customers that were there began to leave Horton's. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take any more of this, so with my broomstick, I put myself in the middle of the boss and the victim, threatening them and telling them I would call the police.
Aren't you a bold one?
After saying those words, the man motioned to the men in suits, and the 3 left. After that, I and other employees called the police and took care of the victim in the back. The man didn't tell us much, but he was clearly terrified. My boss stayed with him in the main office and asked me to go take the trash out back. He would take care of everything. Much calmer, I gathered up the trash and went to the back. What I didn't know was that as soon as I opened the door, there were people waiting for me. The mafia man was in the rain with his 2 bodyguards, who grabbed my arms and pulled me towards him. I struggled to escape, but when I tried to open the door, it was locked. What?
Come on, kid. Do you think it was a coincidence that I knew you'd be taking out the trash?
Before I knew it, the man had stepped behind me, and with one violent movement, grabbed me by the hair and threw me to the ground.
You see, kid, I could have left. In fact, I was about to leave. But you know what? I remembered something. I don't like boldness.
I tried to crawl away, but one of the men grabbed me by the hair and dragged me into a small garden where we had some plants. I felt helpless. Please, don't be angry with me. I only wanted to defend the poor person. You threw hot coffee on him.
Oh boy, don't cry. I think you misinterpreted the situation. I am not angry with you.
You're not?
Of course not. I don't get mad at anybody. I pay people to do that for me.
The man snapped his fingers, and immediately, the other one of the men stepped on my head in the mud. The ground was wet from the rain, and my head was sinking as the man stepped on it and moved his foot as if he wanted to squeeze a cockroach. My head was sinking deeper and deeper. I could hardly breathe, and I was swallowing a lot of dirt. I could feel a worm walking on my face. Luckily, I got to a part where the dirt was dry, and the man stopped. I stuck my head out quickly to breathe and immediately received a punch in the face from the boss.
Not gonna lie, sometimes I do get a little angry.
Suddenly, the man pulled out a gun and pointed it at my head.
Well, kid, I had fun, but you have to go.
Boss, there's people watching us. This is a kid. Maybe we're crossing the line.
Angrily, the boss put the gun away and laughed.
See, I told you guys you should talk a little more.
both of you are actually right. Sorry, kid. I have some anger issues. I'm treating them with a psychologist. The men walked away from me, walking slowly, almost disinterested. Hey, kid. Tell your boss I'll expect him for dinner on Friday. Tell him I'll bring him some nice wine. Confused, I stood in the rain crying, not believing I was alive. The police came for me, and I warned them that the 3 men were escaping. The officers ignored me and told me to drop the subject. That was the last time I visited Horton. Soon after, I moved in with the help of my family. After that, I was terrified for years afraid that this man would come to kill me for no reason. But it never happened. Several years later, I found out that I was incarcerated while doing an interview. I swear that prison had more luxuries than my house. Life is sometimes very unfair, but I am thankful to be alive. I am thankful to smell the coffee every morning and not to have died that terrifying rainy day.
Last night, something extremely weird and scary happened. My friends and I still have no idea how to make sense of it. It was as if we were in a horror story. So, just like every month, me and my buddies, Chris, Noel, Nick, and Asha, were in our regular Tim Hortons for dinner. We all work really tough jobs. I'm a civil engineer, so I'm all the time either on construction sites or in my office. Nick is a writer, so he's either working on his book or brainstorming ideas for his next one. Noel works in a car company, so he's traveling the world making deals and signing contracts. Asha is a professor and had lectures to teach and papers to grade. Still, on every month's second Saturday, we meet at this particular Tim Horton for dinner. We usually share whatever is going on in our life and just chat and chill out. Most of the staff members know us as their regulars, but this time, there was a new waiter there. He was a bit odd. For starters, he wasn't very attentive. Nick had to call him and wave at him a couple of times to get his attention. When he finally arrived at our table for a few minutes, he didn't write down our orders. Then, when he did, Chris had to make sure that all our orders were properly written.
Seems like this guy's either drunk or high,
Nick said. We laughed it off. A few minutes later, the waiter brought us our beers, and luckily, the order was correct. Later, we wanted our water to be refilled, and Chris tried to get the waiter's attention, but he looked right over us, and not at us. Dude, it's difficult to get this guy's attention. What the hell is wrong with him? Asha said.
I'm telling you, he's high on something. Otherwise, who would act like that?
Nick said. Finally, the waiter arrived with water, but spilled some on Nick's lap.
Hey, what the hell, dude? Be a little careful. I don't want a wet spot on my pants. People might think I peed myself or something.
Nick said with a serious face, fed up with the waiter. But the rest of us just laughed out loud. The waiter just said sorry and moved ahead. This continues for the rest of our time there. We try to get the waiter's attention and he walks right past our table without so much as acknowledging us. It was all a big joke and Asha was planning to write a 1-star review to the Tim Hortons. Finally, our food arrived, although the order was perfect. He just placed the wrong food items in front of us. Instead of pointing it out, we just laughed some more and then made sure each of us had their ordered food. Thereafter, instead of giving his order for our beer, we just started telling him to surprise us, and each time he used to get us the same beer we had ordered initially. He was still in a daze as if there was a fog in his brain instead of actual working brain cells. This was definitely going to be a memorable dinner we would often joke about henceforth. When we were ready to pay, a waitress walked up to our table with our bill and apologized for the tardiness of the waiter earlier. We assured her it was no big deal, and Asha even dropped the idea of writing a negative review. She also told us that the previous waiter had finally taken his much-needed break and was out in the back. Finally, we paid the bill and walked out of the restaurant, still cracking jokes about the waiter and how Nick would have looked if the waiter would have spilled the water in his lap. I had picked up the guys from their homes and was responsible for dropping them off. That's why I only drank 2 beers. However, I'd parked my car in the parking lot behind the Tim Hortons. As we all headed there, still laughing and joking, Asha stops in her tracks and stares to her right, straight at something. Noel was the first one to spot him. "What are you looking at?" Asha asked. "Look there." He points right at the back door of the restaurant we just exited. It's dark out there, only 2 streetlights at the 2 extreme ends of the parking lot. However, there's hardly any light illuminating the back door of the restaurant. So when Asha asked us to look carefully, we all stopped and looked towards the door. That's when we saw it. The most disturbing view of our life. It was weird that people watch disturbing things in a hospital when people die or in movies. And we were all looking at it behind a damn Tim Hortons.
Is it real, or am I dreaming?
Nick asked in an utterly serious tone.
I think it's real,
Chris confirmed. I think so too, I said. That's when it sees, or should I say he, sees us. We're rooted to our spot when our eyes lock, and no one from the group has the strength or the courage to move. Then he moves and takes a step away from the door. That's when our fight-or-flight instincts kick in, and we all started sprinting towards my car. I already had the keys in my hand, and as soon as I reached the car, I unlocked it and got behind the wheel. My friends too piled up into the car and slammed the doors shut, locking them. I started the car and began driving, the headlights illuminating the road. I drove the car at full speed as my friends huddled in the back and passenger seat beside me. All the buzz they were feeling from the beer they had drank drained out of them. I was soon on the main street connecting to the highway, going towards my home. For several minutes, none of us said a word. We were all shocked, and I focused on driving.
Was it true?
Noel asked, and instead of answering him, we all just nodded. We reached my home and I asked everyone to stay the night, and none of them complained. I live in a big apartment, and I didn't sleep until the wee hours. Today, when I walked out of my room, all my friends were sitting around my coffee table, just staring straight at the TV, which was showing some news. However, when I read the news, the ground beneath my body shook. The news report said that a person's dead body was found in a parking lot behind a Tim Hortons restaurant this morning, the exact Tim Hortons we had dinner at last night. The dead body was missing some vital organs like the heart, the kidneys, and the liver. It was suspected that it was an animal attack, but this restaurant is in the middle of the city, so there's no chance of it being an animal attack, as the largest animals we have are dogs, who just bite if they need to, not to eat your selective organs. The news stated that some detectives claimed it was done by a person, but most of the cops had dismissed the theory, claiming who would be so gruesome. The dead person was a waiter who worked at Tim Hortons itself. The poor fellow must have come out of the back door for his break and fallen prey to whatever it was. The whole media, cops, and detectives were baffled by the case. They also say that whoever did this is still roaming the streets. Once the news shifts to another topic, we all look at each other, wondering what to do. Because last night, we saw this poor person being killed. When we stopped in the parking lot and looked at the back door, we had seen a person on all fours eating this dead waiter. We couldn't believe our eyes. When we registered what we were seeing, the man on all fours saw us and then got up. He was standing on his 2 legs now, but his face was red from the blood of the dead man he had just eaten. When we looked a bit more clearly, we noticed that the horrifying-looking man was none other than the weird waiter who had served us tonight. The moment he registered us staring at him, he began running at us, and we ran. And you know how the rest goes from there. We're not sure what to make of it, but we certainly know that the waiter was the one who had killed and eaten his poor colleague. Should we report to the cops, or should we forget last night and move on with our lives? And more importantly, what was this waiter? Was he a demon or an animal?
I do not want to reveal my name or my whereabouts, but I wish to share this story with you, as I believe it's important for people to know it. For the sake of this story, I'm going to use fake names for all the characters, including mine, except one. I still remember the first time I went on a date. I had just turned 20 and my parents were okay with me dating. My friend Sally knew a guy from her dad's workplace she thought would be perfect for me. I had not met this guy before, so it was like a blind date for me. I was excited and fussed about my dress and hair for almost a week before the date. As this was a blind date, instead of me contacting the guy, Sally had informed me that the guy would meet me at Tim Hortons on Saturday. My parents and my brother are very protective of me, so it was decided that my brother would drop me off at the restaurant for the date. Back then there were no cell phones, just some payphones. Before I got out of the car that afternoon, my brother said,
"Hey, if you want me to bring you home anytime, just call home and I'll be there to pick you up in no time."
"Sure, but I don't think that would be necessary, as I plan on enjoying my first date to the fullest." I was messing with my brother considering how protective he was. A few minutes later, I was sitting in front of a handsome and charming man. He was wearing a brown jacket with a white shirt underneath it paired with black pants. The moment I saw him, I was puzzled why he would want to go on a date with little old me. He was a few years older than me and extremely good-looking. He could have any woman in the town if he wanted, but he had chosen me. "Is this a blind date for you too?" I asked. He chuckled a bit and said,
"Honestly, no. I had seen you hanging out with Sally a couple times, and I asked her to fix this date so I could take you out."
That was a surprise that he had specifically wanted to go out with me, but I let it go and decided to get to know that man more. "So, what do you do?"
"I'm working part-time at the wood shop Sally's family owns. What about you?"
I just graduated and plan on going to college a year later. Till then, I'm just enjoying my break.
That sounds fun. Should we order now?
Sure. I'd like a chicken burger and a chocolate milkshake,
I said, and he read the menu and ordered a sandwich for himself. We got along pretty well. He was as funny as he was handsome, and I thought about how well my first date was going. I was going to thank Sally after I got home and tell her all about the date. While we were having our food and talking, my date suddenly mentioned a few facts about me that only a handful of close people knew, and I was sure that Sally would not have told him all of it. It seemed like a red flag to me, but I tried convincing myself that it was okay. But as the time passed, I could not shake it off. The fact that he might have followed me or stalked me, all those things seemed very creepy. He noticed my unease and my reluctance to talk as freely as I was talking before, and I was sure he knew what had made me so uncomfortable. Slowly, he too lost interest in our date, and we both ate our food quietly. However, instead of focusing on the food, he was staring at me weirdly. His handsome face had conjured into something sinister. That's when I felt the cold metal against my thigh. At first I thought it was the table, but when the cold metal was dragged against my thigh, I understood what it was. The panic in my eyes were evident.
"Don't you dare scream or yell. Do as I say, and nothing bad will happen to anyone,"
my date said to me, with a very charming but very fake smile. For a second, I just froze, unable to focus on anything. just sitting there staring at my plate and contemplating how I got myself in this situation. He kept on dragging the knife against my thighs, the sharp side making contact with my skin. I knew if I even moved an inch, it would pierce my skin. That's when the waitress interrupted us, asking if we needed anything.
No thanks, we are good,
my date replied on our behalf. I knew I had to bail out of this date before it got too far, and that was probably my only chance.
Excuse me, miss. Actually, I wanted to know where the restroom is.
I asked the waitress just as she was about to leave. Maybe she saw the panic in my eyes too, and asked me to walk with her so she could guide me to it. I excused myself to go to the restroom. I knew he wouldn't harm me while someone was present. Instead of going to the restroom, I asked the waitress to take me to the payphone so that I could call my brother.
Hey, George, could you please come get me? I'm hiding in the women's restroom in the Tim Hortons.
Listening to the terror in my voice, I knew he was on high alert. I could hear him grab his keys on the other end. I quietly waited in the last stall until I heard my brother's voice out of the restroom calling for me. I quietly waited in the last stall till I heard my brother's voice out of the restroom calling for me. I rushed to him and we left the restaurant, and we drove back home. I told him all about the date of mine.
Relax, Audrey. I've got you now. Forget about that date. You're safe.
The next morning, around 4 a.m., when my brother was leaving the house for his paper route, he heard some rustling in a bush beside our main door. He did not have a gun, but he quickly grabbed his baseball bat to tackle whatever was in there. Mostly it was usually a raccoon or some rodent. However, this time a grown man stood up behind the bush and started running into the road the opposite direction. That startled my brother, and instead of chasing the man, he ran inside and woke me and our parents up. We all were pretty confused as to what had happened, and everyone was asking my brother questions about the incident. My dad asked him to describe the man, and what he said cracked the floor open beneath my feet.
He was tall, had fair skin, had wavy hair, and wore a brown jacket and black pants.
He had just described my date. I just stood there shocked.
I guess that was my date from yesterday.
Hearing that, my parents and brothers were extremely worried too. Although we did not report the incident as there wasn't much to report anyways, we did keep an eye out for the young man. It was clear by then that he wanted to hurt me, so for the next few days, we made sure that I wouldn't go out alone. 3 years had passed, and I was in a happy relationship with my current boyfriend at the time, Marco, when one evening we were chilling in my home's living room. We saw the news. It was about the murder of a few women, and the serial killer who killed them. The moment I looked at the face of the man on the news, the cup of coffee from my hand dropped to the ground and broke. For a few seconds, I was rendered speechless and just stared at the screen. My brother and father were also watching the news with me and Marco.
George, that's the guy. The guy I went on a date with all those years ago. The one who stalked me.
Good God, I feel so relieved that you decided to walk away from that man.
The news said that he had sexually assaulted a couple of women and killed them. I cried and thanked the heavens for saving me from the predator. According to the news reporter, the killer's name was Ted Bundy.